So welcome members to our 19th meeting of the Public Accounts Committee for this 2022-27 mandate. Members, the committee meeting will be recorded and broadcast through Parliament buildings and online. However, there could be a slight delay in moving to any private session or back into the public session, so please be patient. I advise as well those in the public gallery, of course, are welcome to use mobile devices as long as they're in airplane mode and all devices are muted. They can connect to the Assembly Wi-Fi. Password details are available on the gallery rules. It is not permitted to take photographs or recording of any of the meeting. So agenda item 1 then, I have apologies from the Chair, Daniel McCrossan, MLA, and I also have apologies as Colin Gildernew will be 15 minutes late. Agenda item 2 then, draft minutes. Members will refer you to the draft minutes of the meeting of the 26th of September at pages 7 of the pack. Are you in agreement of the minutes?
Agreed.
Thank you. Agenda item 3 then, declarations of interest. Do any members have any relevant declarations of interest to declare for this meeting? No? Thank you. Agenda item 4, matters arising. So members, at page 13 of the meeting pack is a letter from Neil Gibson, Accounting Officer of the Department of Finance, advising of a change of witness from the upcoming evidence session on major capital projects. Brett Hannam, Chief Executive of the Strategic Investment Board, will replace Scott Wilson, Head of Investment Strategy, Strategic Investment Board. A short biography has been included in the meeting pack. Members, are you happy to note this change of witness?
Great.
Thank you. Agenda item 5 then, there's no chairperson's business. Agenda item 6, there is no correspondence. So agenda item 7 then, we'll start our inquiry into major capital projects, follow-up report and evidence session.
Good afternoon. Thank you so
Hi.
much.
Hi, you're all very welcome to the meeting. So we have Jane Brady, Head of the Northern Ireland Civil Service, Patrick McGee, Non-Executive Member of the NICS Board, Neil Gibson, Accounting Officer from the Department of Finance, Sharon Smith, Chief Executive, Construction, Procurement, Delivery from the Department of Finance, Brett Hannam, Chief Executive of Strategic Investment Board, Dorina Carville, Controller and Auditor General, Stuart Stevenson, Treasurer Officer of Accounts, Department of Finance. Members, I refer you to the relevant papers relating to this agenda item at pages 18 to 103 of your pack and pages 3 to 10 of the tabled papers. Ms Brady, Mr McGee, Mr Gibson, Mrs Smith and Mr Hannam, please, you're all very welcome to PAC. And thank you so much for taking the time to meet with us all. We have a number of questions that we would like to ask you today around the following themes. So I'll break that down. So we're going to have some introductory questions from myself. Then we will go into governance structures, oversight bodies and ISNI, commissioning and delivery mechanisms of major capital projects, skills capacity, legal challenges, cost and time overruns. And then if time permits, the remaining areas are root cause analysis and ISNI delivery mechanisms. So as you can see, we have quite a lot to get through today. So to make the most of this time, I would please ask if you can keep your answers as succinct as possible. And of course, as members, we'll do the same. So I hope you understand. But first of all, Mrs Brady, I would of course like to invite you to make your opening statement.
Thank you so much, Chair and members. I'll keep my opening remarks brief, as you mentioned, to allow time for the questioning. Firstly, I'd like to thank the Northern Ireland Audit Office for their follow-up report on major capital projects, which provide a useful update on the civil service capital portfolio and identifies areas that we clearly need to consider and to address. We're happy to be here before the committee to discuss the issues raised in the report and provide evidence on improvements and progress we have made. Following on from the PAC's report on major capital projects published in October 2020, the reporting and oversight mechanism for major programmes and projects has changed significantly. Since June 2022, the Civil Service Board has been provided with 6 monthly reports on the delivery of major capital programmes and projects. These reports have been developed by the Department of Finance's Commercial Delivery Group in collaboration with the Strategic Investment Board, both of which I have with me here today, and in conjunction with the Investment Strategy Northern Ireland reporting. These reports have increased the focus on transparency on the strategic common issues departments face when delivering major capital projects. The appointment of independent non-executive members to the Civil Service Board on the 1st of February 2023 was a recommendation within the PAC's 2020 report on major capital projects. They bring exceptional international experience in key areas of focus for the Civil Service, including strategic organisational transformation, socio-economic policy development and government investment. Patrick McGee, here with me today, is one of those non-executive members, and he provides his perspective and detail on his role as Chair of the Investment Strategy Northern Ireland Subcommittee of the Civil Service Board. I have established this in anticipation of the publication of the Investment Strategy for Northern Ireland. Scott Wilson from the Strategic Investment Board is also accompanying us alongside Brett, who is the Chief Executive Officer from the Strategic Investment Board. Overall, though, we are already seeing that the new governance arrangements and reporting of the oversight of major capital projects has created a more cohesive working relationship between the Executive Office, Department of Finance and the Strategic Investment Board. I accept, however, that merely improving reporting and governance arrangements will not be sufficient to support the delivery of major capital projects, particularly given the challenges that have persisted over the last decade. To make sure the Civil Service is better placed to deliver, a total of 105 recommendations from a number of reports over the last 10 years, some of which are referenced in the Audit Office report, have been analysed, and we have grouped these into 12 actions in the Investment Strategy for Northern Ireland Enabling Action Plan. In addition, Strategic Investment Board have also carried out a root cause analysis report on the reasons for the delays and cost overruns for the projects listed in the Audit Office's 2019 report on major capital projects. The root cause analysis report identified issues related to policy, to people and to processes which were hampering progress in the delivery of major capital projects. The recommendations from the root causes analysis report have also been incorporated into the ISNI Enabling Action Plan. The work of the ISNI Committee, chaired by Patrick, will be critical to monitor the delivery of each of the 12 enabling actions, and we are confident that this will make a real difference in driving projects forward. I hope this has given you some assurance of my commitment to driving performance in the delivery of the executive priorities, and I'm happy to take your questions.
Thank you so much for that. And I'm going to start with just a few questions for yourself, and then I will pass on to John. But this committee obviously had previously considered this report 4 years ago, and we're here today and we're looking at a number of the issues which are very similar to what was reported previously. The Audit Office obviously had found that the time and cost overruns are continuing to persist. Current figures indicate that the overspend on major capital portfolio is now £3 billion when compared to original approved cost. So you've touched on it slightly there. But my question, I suppose, would be, why do you believe there has been such limited progress from the previous report till now?
Yes, thank you for the analysis of the report from 4 years ago. Actually, I was at this committee 3 years ago. I'm just in post now, 3 years, and I took the opportunity in preparing for this meeting to look over the commitments that I gave to that committee. I'm happy to talk through those areas. One of your recommendations was clearly to establish the Northern Ireland Civil Service Board and reconstitute that, and we delivered on that as part of the delivery, and also the appointment of expert non-exec members, of which Patrick is here to represent. I talked about the recruitment for permanent SEC colleagues, and I here have on my right-hand side a recruitment prominent economist from the island of Ireland who's brought the skills and expertise into delivering the governance structures and appropriate structures for Northern Ireland. We've also looked towards the investment strategy for Northern Ireland, which went out to consultation in 2022 and is which in preparation for a restored executive. However, also in those previous 3 years, we'll also know in that 2 of those we have had no executive. We have had obviously the implications of the war in Ukraine, which has had a cost of living crisis, but also within the infrastructure setting has caused massive increases in capital projects. I guess those issues then must be addressed, of course, in terms of the implications of where we are from the capital projects. I think when we look towards the areas, and my colleagues can provide some further insights into breaking down that overrun of the 44% overrun, and acknowledging that we, of course, need to do much better. The analysis from the Strategic Investment Board, from the analysis I performed from data, is that around 50%, 22% of those was due to the inflationary costs within those capital projects. Again, when we unpick that further, the analysis which the Audit Office has taken, and rightly, is using the outline business cases. Those go to a final business case perspective in some areas, and analysis is at that point of actioning. There is a smaller gap between those areas. But also, most significantly, some of those major projects, and grateful during the restoration of the executive agreements and announcements had been made in terms of Stroul and the A5 just yesterday. There has been progress made in those, but however, the A5 in its sense represented a significant proportion of that overrun. Estimated more than 50% of those signature projects came from that one project. Of course, those areas are multifaceted, and I think that was the area to unpick. They're overall the policy areas, and some of those are regarding the planning aspects. Of course, policy matters are for ministers to decide and to bring forward as part of those areas. Acknowledged, I think, within the draft programme from government, from the incoming executive, that there needs to be analysis of the planning improvement scheme. But also, what is the work of the civil service? What do we need to do in terms of delivering that? We need to obviously look at the key learnings across departments. Some projects have delivered on time within schedule, but that has not been consistent across those areas. So a key aspect within our governance is establishing a subcommittee across the departments with those represented with the major capital projects overseen by Patrick to take those common learnings. But a second thread of that is the people capability. A clear recommendation from the Audit Office's report is the skills that is required in terms of sometimes external skills, but also training. So the activities taken apart regarding Cabinet Office training, but also making sure those skills are available. I'm happy to bring some of my colleagues in on some of those specific aspects. Perhaps, Patrick, you may want to comment on the findings from the 12 enabling actions.
Sure. No, and the first thing to say is, delighted to be serving on the NICS board, and I've seen a lot of collaborative effort across the departments to bring systemic changes. And again, what Jane says is right. We have 9 separate departments, but we're trying to work as one government, one executive. So the first thing to say about capital projects is they are difficult the world over. When Jane asked me to chair this committee, I checked and said, I know a fair amount about this, but I'll do some more reading. So there's a book I'd recommend people to read called How Big Things Get Done by Ben Flyberg, who's a Danish professor who studies projects all over the world. And I would say the vast majority of these projects are within the tolerances you'd see internationally. But again, the A5 and maybe the Children's Hospital have been extreme. And he does talk about things that have big tails and have big changes from the initial estimates. So absolutely, I want to help make things better, because the roads and the hospitals and all the other infrastructure we need across Northern Ireland are incredibly important to our lives and our economic development. So delighted to be serving. We're not the only country where has issues, but we need to be as good as we can be. And I do think the ISNI committee, and I'm happy to take questions as we go through in terms of how we can help delivery to deliver the programme for government in ISNI.
And perhaps this is a fine reflection that we are having Raphael Bengoa back in Northern Ireland next week. Really welcome to come back and part of a renewed draft programme for government. But when we had all our senior civil servants together yesterday, we were reminded of his quote where he said, "It's not people, it is people, not strategies, that bring about change, and it's relationships, not systems, that make it work." And I know that my colleague Neil was invited to present in front of this committee, and I requested that actually we come together collectively, because this is not a problem that can be solved in the Department of Finance. It requires collective leadership, it requires common learning, it requires that cultural change to break down some of those perceived silos and to learn from each other. So I hope in the representation, maybe a slightly larger panel than you had anticipated, but we're grateful that you've allowed us to present, because that's the spirit and the culture that we want to be here. And again, it seems a very apt time at the consultation for a draft programme for government, which talks about the major capital, talks about the need for reform and transformation, that we come here to take your thoughts and to your learnings and to make sure that that's fed in as officials into what we can do, of course respecting the constitutional realities of the positions we hold.
No, thank you for that. And you've detailed a cocktail, I would call it, of concerns and struggles moving forward. And I just want to take you back, I suppose, to that £3 billion figure, which is phenomenal. So my question would be, kind of, what justification is there to continue to start these major capital projects when we don't seem to have made much progress, and we're continuing to run into these time and cost overruns, which of course is affecting the public purse?
So, taking and perhaps colleagues in finance with Neil and Sharon can come in. But in decoupling those, so the increase from the 5.63 billion to the 8 billion was a 44% increase. Again, those were based on outline business cases, which is an estimate. They go to then, obviously through the process, larger projects will go to a final business case, which will come back to finance to approve if that's on the basis. Department of Finance gathered information on those which went to a final business case process as opposed to outline business case. And of that, they saw the deviation between the outturn costs between the final business case at 10% versus 30% with the outline business case. Between those areas, there are many issues. But again, if you look towards that 44% increase and taking that as whole, the estimates from colleagues in Independent Analysis and Strategic Investment Board is 22% was the capital inflationary costs, which were global forces and which were significantly obviously outside the control of officials and the service. Within those areas, there were also the overruns of the A5 was most significant, so it was agreed at just under 800 million in 2012 with a significant overrun. It will need to be concluded, and obviously that'll be commercially sensitive, but our estimates would comprise that of the signature projects it would be circa 50% of that overrun costs. We know the underlying issue with that largely down to judicial review process, of which there is reform and recommendations that are put forward. And I think the key for this is that there are hundreds of recommendations. It's how we unpick those to the themes that we can actually address. So policy areas, particularly in planning, social licence and those investment, are areas where reform is needed. There are clearly issues in process where there is people, skills and characteristics needed in terms of training and procurement. We need to find a different way to address that. The cost estimates perspective of where we're placing the cost estimates, and also do we have the right people. So in identifying the actual enabling actions of where we need to deliver, we'll unpick those areas, but it's clear to see that there is no panacea to unlock those aspects. And also just mindful of me to reflect that we talk about the overrun of 44%, that that funding was not committed until it comes into the executive and the budget. Obviously we haven't had a budget agreed until this year, so that was the first opportunity to allow us to do that. But I'm very mindful that when the A5 was agreed, that after 56 fatalities on that desk, and we had children from St Kieran's with in memory of their friend and those crosses of Camille, that this is more than a financial cost aspect, and also a lost opportunity cost. This is real lives. This is hospitals not being built. These are schools not being refurbished. So we take that extremely seriously, which is why we're looking towards what are the underlying areas that we can address. Some of those have been agreed to be included by the executive in terms of the enabling actions and the infrastructure in the draft programme for government. Other core aspects will be provided, subject to executive agreement, in the investment strategy for Northern Ireland. We will, within the NICS board and the committee for the investment strategy, which reports to the NICS board and the governance structure, be there to provide those cross-cutting challenge functions, but also those common learnings as we go forward. I guess also to say, I think the executive has made very significant progress in these last 8 months. We have they have delivered with support from officials, interim fiscal framework. They have delivered a sustainability plan today. They have delivered a draft programme for government. They've delivered a legislation framework. Work was done in preparations for an investment strategy for Northern Ireland, which will be for ministers to bring that forward. We haven't had an investment strategy in Northern Ireland nor a programme for government since 2011. And we also haven't had multi-year funding of any of the last 10 years as well within that trajectory. So whilst I acknowledge there is much work to do, I think there is aspects, core aspects where it have moved forward substantially to provide the platform for the next number of years for this executive and this mandate.
Thank you. And the last question from me. Could you detail some specific improvements or examples of delivery that has been made since the previous report?
Perhaps I'll bring in my colleagues in Department of Finance. My focus has been in the high-level systemic structures and aspects. It has been in regard to making sure when the executive came back that they were briefed, the parties entitled for an executive, they were briefed as widely as to the incoming issues and the implications, and indeed their views are reflected in the programme for government, that we cannot divorce a programme for government with the capital infrastructure areas, that we need to address those, and those cannot be addressed through short-term aspects, that they're complex and interchanged. I've talked about the appointment of the next board and the key non-execs to lead that. There's also been a significant programme that's been delivered in terms of the skills and the setups of the organisations, but perhaps, and obviously agreement on Stroll and on the AFI, but perhaps I'll hand over to Neil and to Sharon to detail the specifics.
Thank you. Yes, just reflecting on your previous question about, the honest truth of it is we have to be able to do this. It's what our citizens expect, demand and deserve. The true cost, as Jane mentioned, is in people who don't get educated in the way that they should, lives that are lost. We absolutely require modern, updated infrastructure, but the infrastructure world's getting more complicated. The environmental standards that we rightly must reach are making planning applications to procurement procedures more complex than they've ever been. So the challenges to upskill, to make sure that we're able to deliver everything that we should, are constantly increasing to be able to do it. But there is no other choice. If we're getting anything wrong, then we've got to find ways to get it right. The option is not to avoid having overspends by not doing the work. We absolutely require significant infrastructure investment. And to take then the point about areas that we've improved, well, there are many, but one of the quotes that Jane mentioned is a really important one. It is people that matter. So one of the main things and focuses in my time has been to look at getting that SRO network together, getting the people who are delivering the projects together into the same room to share their experiences, to talk about what went well, to feel that there's a colleague or a friend to pick up a phone to say, I've reached a particular challenging stage of the procurement or the process. Who's been through that before? Where can we make sure that we can rely on each other? It can be quite a lonely experience running a major project, carrying the weight of that on your shoulders and worrying about the ability to deliver. So we've done quite a lot there, and Sharon will speak to some of the training and development work that we've been doing to get people more qualified, to get people more part of a network and a team and a family across the service that knows there are people to rely on. So I would point to that journey of training and development as one success, that sense of the new committee, the sense that there's more people to pick up the phone to ring. And I do believe a greater understanding, as we've seen the narrative play out globally, whether it's children's hospitals in the Republic of Ireland, whether it's High Speed Rail 2, Hinkley Point, the fact that people don't feel there isn't lessons to be learned from other places too, that actually these have been the most difficult times with an improving, rightly as I say, environmental standards journey at the same time of inflation that we hadn't seen in a generation, more than that actually, alongside a scarcity of money. That's a very difficult cocktail in which to operate. So I think one of the points I would speak to is as the success for that, and that's because I meet and see the SRO network the enthusiasm and encourage any members to reach out, meet some of the people running the projects, because ultimately it's in their good work that the delivery will really be brought through. But I think it is worth, Sharon, just reflecting on some of the work we've been doing in terms of, and your team and others, to increase the level of people going through the commercial training and other things to help us deliver.
Yeah, and it is, we have more people going to universities in England to do the major Project Leadership Academy and also the Project Leadership Programme. And it's not only the training itself, but it's networking with SROs in England, Wales and Scotland who are maybe dealing with bigger programmes, because on a scale we're a lot smaller than elsewhere, but we're experiencing the same problems because it's not all about scale. But I think the true testament is what has been delivered in terms of the flagship project. We have had the Belfast Transport Hub, which itself is an absolutely fabulous world-class hub for transport in Northern Ireland, but it also, behind that, there's social value, there's the community work, the regeneration that went on in that community. We have had the Northern Ireland Fire and Rescue Service Learning and Development Centre, which opened and again has gone through their Gate 5, their benefits realisation, and it is achieving the benefits that it was meant to do. We had the University of Ulster Greater Belfast Development, which again a world-class building in a very deprived area of North Belfast, which has regenerated the area. And not only, and people could look at that and say there was cost overrun there and delays, and yes there were, but look at the regeneration, the benefits that that's delivering to that area in terms of student accommodation and revitalising and taking some of the issues that our area were experiencing. And then Stroll Shared Education Campus, which we really struggled to get across the line. And in terms of the issues with delays in projects, both Brett and I sat on the project board for Stroll, and it was really difficult to keep an interest in that project because of the instability in terms of funding, no executive. So it's really, really difficult sometimes to look under the sort of the front of a project and see exactly what's happening underneath. That does cause time and cost, and they're both related to each other. If you do have delays, you will have cost overruns as well. So I think the onus is on us to make sure that things that are within our control that we manage effectively. And certainly with the SRO network and the programme of training that we're putting SROs through, people understand the importance that's now been placed on making sure that you're delivering at pace as quickly as you can, obviously, with the issues with planning and everything else that goes along with these major projects. But it is about giving people assurance that Northern Ireland is competent to deliver major capital projects, because we cannot look as an attractive proposition to people who are wanting to invest here and people who are hopefully going to tender for contracts. So I think there has been a huge amount of work in terms of learning, in terms of delivery, and also in terms of the culture that we're trying to portray for projects in particular.
I appreciate that. Thank you very much. So I'm going to hand over to John, who will take us through the next set of questions.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks very much, folks, for coming along. We appreciate your time today. My next series of questions are on governance structures. You'll be aware, Ms Brady, that the previous report from this committee, recommendations 1 and 2, covered the role of the head of the civil service, from revising the role to mirror the role in Scotland and Wales and showing leadership. Could you just tell me how you consider you've shown leadership on major capital projects since you took office?
Yes, thank you for the question. I guess maybe the first sign is that I asked to be at this committee, having not been requested, because I recognise the important role for leadership.
I was happy you came.
And also reflecting when I was here 3 years ago that the commitments that I gave this committee I have fulfilled, notwithstanding there's been other issues and things could have been done better, and there's still other areas. And I guess this isn't something that there's a switch to fix overnight. These are global issues. They're structural, they're cultural, they're many different layers. So that in terms of my commitment, delivering on the aspects that I have provided, and making good on those areas is really core to me. The recommendation regarding replicating the structure that there is in Scotland and Wales to have a principal accounting officer, those recommendations, of course, went to ministers for consideration. That was not accepted as a recommendation. That's reflective of the constitutional arrangements that we have with the Belfast Good Friday Agreement, and I guess the structures were designed and intended to be that way, to give individual ministers and mandatory coalition the level of autonomy within their departments. Accounting officers as permanent secretaries, they are accountable to this committee. They work under the direction and control of their ministers, and I am responsible for their their leadership and for their management, but not from a direction of policy. And those reflect the constitutional realities. It is not for me to advise or propose to ministers or to the executives in terms of any constitutional changes. So my role is to work, again, within the issues I find to give the best advice to the ministers that I serve, but also within that framework to make sure that the outcomes that they want to achieve, that they all want to achieve, are delivered. And that is why I've created the structure of the Civil Service Board, created the independence in terms of that challenge function, being here again to be challenged as part of those areas.
Thank you. You referred to the Northern Ireland Civil Service Board, which you reconstituted. That includes yourself and each of the accounting officers. Can you just tell me what you've done to demonstrate collective and collaborative leadership in respect of capital projects through that board?
Yes, since so the Civil Service Board prior to my appointment was the head of the Civil Service and the perm secretaries and the accounting officers. It had when I reconstituted that and re-established the terms of reference, which I've done that, which I've also recently reflected with non-execs. My commitment was there needs to be a small number of areas that we need to focus on, and I looked and analysed the Audit Office findings and reports in terms of the major capital projects, capability and capacity, RHI recommendations, but also looking forward to in my view, what with guidance with executive, of course, where might be the opportunities that I would advise an executive to look at. So whilst we reflect the problems that have issued and the lessons we need to learn, we also need to look forward to where the opportunities, particularly for the infrastructure, an ageing population and different demographics, climate, those areas. So we identified as part of that with the PermSecs 3 key areas to focus on. One was the people piece, because people, as Bengo said, is at the core to this, the people and the culture. So we established a strand to focus on those people issues. We have developed and delivering a 1-year people plan. We are now in engagement in terms of that 5-year people plan, again aligning with the programme for government as draft in terms of that transformation piece. The second area is in public policy development and reform, and again those areas we need to look at from a programme for government, how we move those forward. That reform and transformation will be focused on at an official level within that group. And thirdly was the investment strategy for Northern Ireland, and looking towards how we look to bring in those skill sets, but the funding and how we make sure those governance structures are in place. But it was very clear to me, and it was your recommendations as well, that we needed some external scrutiny and support to do that. So I undertook a process which was different to what we'd done before, but to target non-exec members who had specific skills in those key areas. If this is what we want to do, we needed support and challenge, constructive challenge, to bring in to allow us to do that. So through that process, we've identified, and through a open and transparent process, we have recruited 3 non-execs. Patrick is here. Again, Patrick can perhaps give you his background in terms of his skills, and I'll hand over to him shortly. In leading that investment strategy aspect, he's based in London and worked in Whitehall. Our leader for the people strategy is in the private sector, she's again based in Basel, Laura McKeveney, but led people transformation in large organisations and very significant transformation change. And then we have a representative from the Irish, the former chair of ESRI, that social economic policy delivery, who's looked towards the transformation of public services, who will look towards that further reform element. So those now chair the subcommittees, and they have established working groups. Within those, there are permanent secretaries represented, but they are chaired by those external non-execs to deliver and develop that change. And we're developing that programme for government. And maybe hand over to Patrick specifically.
Yeah, sure. Well, just in terms of background, I've been very fortunate, brought up and educated here, went off to the US for a couple of years, 18 years investment banking, working in looking after big construction companies, utilities, floated and infrastructure funds, so quite a good private sector experience of how infrastructure gets delivered. Then went into government in Whitehall, worked for shareholder executive, set up the British Business Bank, became an executive there on the board and delivered very significant programs. And then now entering the third phase of my career on a portfolio of different 4 commercial boards plus government. But I would thank the PAC and the IAO for the recommendation and Jane's leadership for bringing us in. I do believe we're beginning to make a difference. And you asked about collective leadership around this. So maybe just take the journey on this. So I joined the first board meeting in March last year. And we were already beginning to get another recommendation sort of brought to the table on a regular basis MPP reporting, which Sharon had done. That was good, but I wanted to help take that further. So around the turn of the year, again, when the work was going on in this report, we said, let's formalise this more. Let's create an investment strategy. And the way I asked the team, and again, full praise to Sharon and Scott Wilson from SIB, have been really fantastic in reaching across the departments. And we're doing three things. We're developing a strategy, the what will we spend the future capital on? And that strategy is now with ministers and hopefully be published before the end of the year. And that'll be a great signal. It's the first investment strategy in a dozen years. Really importantly, and maybe my career has allowed me to focus on the big things. We've 13 or 15 different reports, 105 recommendations, and I'm not sure that anyone could say, how do these all come together? So I asked Scott and Sharon, and they agreed to do it. They went into a room with a group of like-minded officials and said, how can we make this better? So we've created an enabling action plan with 12 different actions. I asked them, Brett had come along and give a presentation to the SRO network on the root causes. And he said the main problems are people, processes and policy. So I got the team to group those 12 actions into people, process and policy. I could take you through any of those if you wish. So we're actually creating a pathway and a strategic way forward to how we make things better. So it'll be a long-term endeavour, but I think it's exactly the right thing to be going on. And in terms of the leadership, it's not just Jane's leadership, it's the leadership of the permanent secretaries around the table. Historically, they have been, accountable under ministers and control, but they've actually agreed to share knowledge and expertise around the table and say, okay, how do we make things better? And I think the SRO network, which I've attended, I think every one, I'm looking forward to coming back for the one in business cases in November. You do have the people who chatted to the person who delivered the fire and rescue, chatted to the person who delivered the A6 and say, how do you help deliver the A5? Police college, how can you help do those things forward? So it is about the people and getting those people together. And Neil and Dennis and I tend to, head in Department for Infrastructure, tend to go to those and just show that leadership and say, we're here to create a strategic framework to take this forward. So I don't think I could have said that a year or 2 years ago. So, let's hope that, that strategic pathway takes us to a better future.
Yeah, no, that is useful. And I think the reason for the recommendation originally was there's a general acceptance that the private sector working alongside the public sector will inevitably save money and create better processes. Mm-hmm. I'm just wondering, with the three being now on the board for the period of time you've described, can you demonstrate some examples of where that delivery has impacted on actual capital projects in terms of savings to date? I appreciate you talking about the structures and processes, but is there demonstrating the actual evidence so far, or is it too early at this stage in your opinion?
It's early. As I said, I think pages 12 and 13 of your report really show, what has been delivered. Sharon called some of the things out. The Belfast Rapid Transit. Driving up the A6 to visit the Northwest is fantastic. Jane asked me to host an investment summit with Senator Kennedy when he was over. We took him to the University of Ulster campus, and it was really like, wow, this is really impressive. So, there have been successes. Can I do a direct line from, I said this at this committee, to, that hung the door better in the University of Ulster? Possibly not. But I definitely think, and we can make those lessons learn. And I do think we have some very good people. It's my job to constructively challenge, but also support. The colleagues that I see in those SRO networks who have delivered those projects are very proud of what they're doing, and they're more than happy to share the lessons that they have learned. So I'm filled with optimism, but I'm always an optimist, and my glass is always half full. So apologies if that's the
I would
case.
also say Patrick's also very candid, so I know he feels very candid, and he has been, and it has been a very constructive challenge. I'm just reflecting, Stuart, on your points as well. Some of the aspects of this is about how we work together, and I guess those common learnings that we take, but also identified in the Programme for Government as a reform and transformation unit, and within that a delivery unit concept. So not everything can be a priority, but the things that we do prioritise, how do we actually focus behind those? And I think some of the flagships, calling them a flagship, but actually what do we do as a service to make sure we get behind and support those? And that for me is a key aspect as we move forward. The the draft programme for government outlines that these will be reported on an annual basis. We have just published the NISRA wellbeing dashboard, which is independent stats. There's nowhere to hide from that, but there's also nowhere to hide from reporting framework and identifying those areas. And I guess blocking some of those is how do you wrap around support if you know issues are coming to give the common learnings, but how do you resource it appropriately? How do you put the best people in the best places if it is going to be important? And I think that will be the journey for this reform and transformation, is making sure that those bad things don't happen. So perhaps we can, we can look towards, I guess, delivering more on time, but that will take time and mechanisms to deliver. But the commitment that the executive has indicated to actually report on an annual basis in terms of key deliverables.
Okay, just one more, Chair, if that's okay. And just back to yourself, Mr. Beggy, in terms of your authority within the independent, as an independent board member and the other independent board members, can you just shine some light on what accountability you bring to to the major capital projects?
Well, authority is an interesting word, and I remember was reading Jane's words when she spoke to you a few years ago. There's soft power and there's hard power. Mm-hmm. I do not have the authority to tell the accounting officer to do X or Y. Mm-hmm. That's their minister's job. Mm-hmm. Do I have the ability to bring evidence forward, persuade them and say, wouldn't it be good if we put this enabling action plan together? Wouldn't it be good if we, discussions are ongoing about how we allocate, the capital budgets in that ISNI, how we make that enabling action. So very much, I don't see myself as having authority. I can't tell people what to do. Non-executives shouldn't be telling executives what to do, but they can certainly ask the right questions. They can put forward evidence-based proposals and hope that they act on them.
Do yourself and the other independent members feel like your voice is heard to the level it needs to be heard?
As Jane said, I'm pretty candid, so people know if I'm there.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm bringing Diane.
Thank you very much, and thanks for being here today. Major capital projects, as the Chair said, the specific projects that were outlined, we're talking about £3 billion overspend on those. But I don't want to just get fixated on those projects. It's the fact that there's billions of pounds every single year that's being spent on these projects, and the fact again that the Chair said at the start is the same weaknesses that are reported now 4 years on, and just specifically on this one with regard to the board that's now in place. So I just wanted to clarify with you, is my understanding correct? So it's yourself as head of civil service, and then all the permanent secretaries, and then the 3 independent.
3 independents, and in addition to that, we have established committees to the board. Under those there's 2 formally established. The stage 1 is underway, and the draft programme for government. One is chaired for the ISNI by Patrick, and the further one, the People Strategy, is chaired by the other independent non-exec.
I'm just interested as to how the board actually works. So if yourself as the head of civil service and all the permanent secretaries, and you have a lot of capital projects that are coming into a lot of problems, having a lot of weaknesses across them, is everybody challenging each other, or are we all just looking around at what's going wrong in everybody's projects?
Well, shall I give you my vision of how the committee will work? We've only had sort of 4 or 5 committees so far, but I'm quite repetitive sometimes. Maybe but I talk in threes. So what are we going to do? So I see a report coming in the future. How are we delivering on the priority projects within investment strategy for Northern Ireland once it's published? We've already established a dashboard and how are we getting on in terms of the 12 enabling actions. And if there is a blockage there, without telling people what to do, I will suggest, could you help me here? Could you help each other here? So we will be challenging that. And we've had some challenges already, but we've got people to move forward in that enabling action. And then there'll be the monitoring and governance in terms of how we look at that. And again, we'll need to work how we work that with the delivery unit reform and transformation initiatives. But that's the way we set up the terms of reference. And again, it was a journey to take people through because perm secretaries are used to their own departmental boards, ministerial accountability, etc. So it was again to use that soft power and I like to support with a capital S and challenge with a small c, but I can reverse that if we need to. So
and thank you for that, and that is good and it's good practice going forward. But again, I'm just quite concerned that I feel like currently there's a lot of money being spent. Is there enough challenge? Should the board be considering looking at commercial people on the board, interventions. If projects are running and they're clearly in problems, are people taking steps? Is someone sitting in health looking across to the infrastructure permanent secretary saying, that looks terrible, are you going to take a step here, or what is happening? I'm just really concerned, as the chair said at the start, 4 years on, it's the same weaknesses, it's the same problems, and we're sitting here spending billions of pounds every year on these projects. Is the board effective in actually providing challenge? Have you any examples of a time where you have stepped in and stopped something or made a difference?
I might come in on that a little bit to say about some of the processes that are in place to try and help. So we have a gateway process where all our key projects are looked at a number of gateways throughout their life cycle and indeed beyond their delivery. Really important for accounting officers at that point. I meet all of my SROs, look through all our gateways, look at the dashboard of that to see. Now the board can then look at the information coming out of those gateways and say, are there any common themes or common patterns that we can look at? For each of us, we have business cases and accounting officers that we've got to manage our own capital budget, and that number's not changing. You've got to come back to DOF if you're going beyond 10% of an overspend. So there are a number of processes that both we have as a Department of Finance in terms of supply approvals, the gateway process that accounting officers use to make sure that they have the information on the project. And then Patrick spoke importantly about, and we're continuing to improve this, better use of data, so that we can see the right patterns to allow the board to make the right advice points. So what are we seeing that's common across projects? We can think of inflation in some of the obvious areas, but if we actually take the story of that particular overspend, whilst it would be inappropriate to run through each project by project, and I wouldn't have that individual knowledge, each one of them has its own story to tell. And we've got to be careful that we don't think a different governance structure would perhaps mitigate against something as significant as a particular change in environmental legislation, or something as significant as, a doubling of oil prices in relation to inflationary pressures or global
Is there any
tensions.
specific examples of the board actually taking corrective action or stopping a department incurring spend here? Or is the board sitting just monitoring things going from bad to worse? If you have any specific examples.
Thank you for your question. Maybe just to come in here, the structure of the board, it does not have a fiduciary responsibility. It is constructed under my chairship. I'm not an accounting officer, so it is within that constitutional boundaries. Our non-exec members are not in senior departmental board members, because actually we need to respect the constitutional arrangements that ministers operate, direct their departments, and indeed their accounting officer responsible to that area. Where we have then taken the issues is actually what are those cross-cutting areas and how do we need to provide those common learnings. It would not be within the gift or constitutionally of myself or Patrick to actually direct an accounting officer to stop an action. In fact, that's of course for a minister or for the Department of Finance to intercede. I guess what it would be, and being really frank, and I maybe ask my colleagues in SIP and Sharon to come in, is when we constituted the board and we were bringing the programmes and projects, the major capital projects to the board, I did not feel that as Perm Sex and even with my non-execs around the table, that it was getting the level of scrutiny and insight and analysis that it needed to actually identify those areas. And this isn't about telling Perm Secs what to do, whatever. This is about supporting them in their learning, identifying common themes where things have gone well, making sure that they're being done in other areas, supporting them in terms of that common learning. Where is that collective oversight? How do we make sure that we're analysing that? And that was why I asked Patrick to chair that separate board, which has done a very significant amount of in-depth work and analysis. And I maybe ask Sharon, who will also, we're in a committee, will obviously speak kindly, but maybe Sharon and Brett to reflect what difference that they have seen or not seen through that structure.
Certainly over the last probably 2 years, there has been a change in terms of departments looking beyond their own department in terms of how we can collaborate. And that is a complete change of mindset. Now, in their own departments, their performance, they're content that they're working through the process, that they're going back to business case approval if they need that extra approval to spend more than their 10% based on their delegated limits. But there is a sense that we are learning lessons, and a lot of those lessons, if we look at the major capital projects They give us a really helpful synopsis of where are the issues. The major one was in terms of funding, and it wasn't the fact that people were spending more than they needed, it was the fact the funding wasn't available, and therefore the project was delayed. And those delays equal cost inflation, construction inflation. And then you move into okay, we've got our site, we've got our funding, now we've got planning issues. So that there's a lot of things. It's not that there's a waste of money in the system, it's just the system is really complicated for legitimate reasons in terms of planning. And I'm sure the committee has heard about, that the fact that there are planning rules and there are planning laws. Our job here is to make sure that they are as straightforward as possible, so that people who are in the planning system are actually moving through it as quickly as possible, or that they fail fast and they realise that that's not an option, and then they can move to another site, which we've seen in a few cases. But I have seen people now stop doing things because of the gateway review process, and they will look at that in terms of their prioritisation within their own department. So there definitely is a change in attitude towards what we can afford, what we actually need to do, and the objectives we need to set. But there are obviously ministerial priorities. There is the ESNE investment plan. I think there's about 130 projects, as there were initially. It's been sort of brought down to about 70. And our job in terms of the ESNE committee is to make sure that those 70 projects move through a system as quickly as possible, because if they don't, any delay will equal cost inflation. And we can't put that on contractors. We can't pass that risk over to contractors because they cannot manage it. And it would not be certainly a good use of how we do contracts by putting people out of business either. So there is the risks that the public sector are better to manage, but delays do equal cost overruns.
No, I appreciate that, and just the point that I was making, coming in behind John on it, was just to clarify the role of the board on it, and just what action is taken. And good practice and advice going forward is great, but it's the confidence of the public and those that are putting us here in this assembly to champion their case, to make sure that we're looking to see what is happening with the projects that are running now. If something bad is happening, if there's obvious issues, is somebody stepping in, and it seems to be the board isn't just that operational, it's more sort of, looking at the collective learning and good practice going forward, and that's what I happy to take on that.
I'll summarise my understanding, and again, I'm still learning about how the Northern Ireland system operates. You have a project board, and Neil and Sharon were saying that they sit in the project board for, say, Stroll, so that's the operational. Are we, encountering a problem, how we're fixing that? But again, through the reporting, as it will come up, if there are recurring themes, we'll be able to do that across. So I think the 9 permanent secretaries, infrastructure arguing with health over why you're doing it that way probably wouldn't be the most productive use. What we need to do is to get the system to work properly and allow at the project board level for those detailed discussions, which may take many hours and wouldn't be the best use of the board's time. So the board is set at a strategic level, and there are operational project boards which will look at each of those. And I think, just to pull out some of the 12 enabling actions, just to give you a sense, I think some good work's been done on business cases. I think the guidance has been improved, and anecdotally, and I sometimes work on anecdote as well as data, is the SROs are going to say, the new guidance is fine, it's how it's operationalised and put into practice. There's 2 of the enabling actions around the planning system, and there's some good short-term improvements, but what are the longer term? So that's where we're looking at, and that's why I wanted it to be 12 is a controllable number of strategic levers that we look at. So we will be looking at that, and that business case process is how project boards and gateways interact.
No, thanks for the clarity just on the role of the board. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Just whether there was maybe you want to reference the role for ISNE for governance and oversight, Brett? I don't know whether you wanted to reference from the SIB for ISNE in terms of the board.
Yes, for the first time, the NICS board is taking ownership of the delivery of the investment strategy rather than leaving it to individual departments to deliver their parts, and I think that represents an important move forward in ensuring collective responsibility for the overall delivery of the investment strategy.
Yeah, we incorporated into the terms of reference that we would be the programme board for the investment strategy, so that does give us a bit more operational lever. I think if I were to quote from memory, we can also make recommendations and actions that we would recommend to Perm Secs and or the executive, so there are escalation mechanisms that we can, if we don't think things are happening, we can pull that chain.
I just wanted to get a wee bit of clarity. See, in terms of the board, how often do they meet?
Every 2 months?
Yeah, so the Civil Service Board meets every 2 months, those are constituted with all the non-execs and then the subcommittees.
Basically, I'm running it. I'm running the ISNI committee 2 to 3 weeks before, so that we can go through in detail, you know, how we're getting on and the what, the how, the monitoring, and then report up and escalate. So, in traditional board governance is you'll have a deeper dive at a committee level and then report up to the board.
And so they've met 4 times, is that correct to date?
The investment strategy board is probably met. Yeah, it's sort of March or May. So I think we're 3 or 4 in. Yeah.
And then we've had, obviously, with the other months, we've had the next board meetings within those.
Thank you.
Chair, could I come in?
Yes, go ahead, Tom.
Just on overspend of capital projects, have you identified any capital projects with a huge overspend that has caused you concern? And if so, what have you done to address that particular issue?
So maybe I'll ask colleagues to come in on this. We talked about previously, I guess, the identification of the overspends, the 44%, 22% being capital overspends. Of that, and the major capital projects, the A5 was the most significant overspend, around provisionally 50% from the 800 million to where that sits now. Obviously, those are areas that were within a policy domain in terms of planning, and I know those have been recommendations provided in the draft programme for government. They're identified as the planning improvements aspect. Within the areas that the root causes have looked at it, it's within that policy domain, in the processes, and then within the people aspect. And maybe ask Sharon just to detail any further areas.
The difficulty is they will sit within a department, Mr Buchanan. So, for example, the A5, the Minister will decide whether that goes ahead or not, and obviously that came to the Executive. So there are controls within the Department of Finance in terms of business case, whether it's final business case, outline business case. But in terms of whether a project gets the green light to go ahead, generally that sits with the Minister. And in fact, when we saw the Executive weren't sitting, that led to some projects not getting to that stage, like Stroll. You know, it did require the Executive to come back, and that's where the delay in not being able to move forward, or the nervousness of the market to actually tender for things, that there may be an issue in terms of funding. That's where it can lead to delay, and those delays will equal construction inflation and cost and time.
Of course, for the 3 years that since I was here in the committee, we've had 2 years without an executive, so executive and ministerial decisions were not able to be made because they were challenged in the courts, that they were rightly outside the purview of a permanent secretary to make those decisions as well. Much work as could have been done was advanced again for Stroll and for the A5, so those decisions have now been made within the ministerial and the executive vehicles.
Okay.
Thank you. So we're going to move on to oversight bodies in ISNI. Slightly touched on it there, but if I pass over to Cathal.
Thanks very much, Chair, and thank you very much for your comments so far. I just want to pick up, obviously, in the last point, because I'm just trying to identify in terms of what to understand ISNI and the committee. They're not over all the major capital projects, but my point is, what have we done to achieve? You know, have we improved any governance or any oversight in terms of all the projects? Or can you comment on that arising from the PSC recommendation? And I know we haven't met, and we won't go back up and going again, but there was recommendations there and some suggestions how to address some of the issues, but some commentary on that, on how we've achieved the oversight bodies and the governance.
We can, I think, perhaps, Sharon, you might want to talk through the actual recommendations of the ones that were outlined and which were accepted, particularly in the role of myself and of the civil service. Those were the re-establishment of the next board, the appointment of independent non-exec members and the reconstitution of that. Those have been fulfilled. There were obviously a number of areas which were not accepted by ministers, and those required a single accounting officer, and I think we've talked through those areas as well. But we're happy to go through each of the recommendations and give you an update if that's helpful, Sharon.
Yep. Okay.
As long as it's progress, Sharon, I'm happy enough to listen. Yeah.
And some of the comments Jane's already made cover these, but the strengthening of the accountability. Every 6 months the NICS board will get a report on the major capital projects, and there was a so what about the reporting, but the reporting led to common issues. It led to the SRO network being set up. It led to us breaking down the barriers in terms of the issues. Procurement was seen as a barrier. We had a session on procurement. We've got an action plan in terms of how we're going to take that forward. Project assurance, there was a lack of clarity in terms of project assurance. We are now looking at how we actually mirror project assurance against business case. So all of the gateway review, and I know I'm throwing a lot of terminology at you, but there's a gateway review process that looks at key milestones. So the strategic outline case will look at business justification, why are you doing what you're doing, is it sited in the right place, if it's a building or a structure. And we will have 3 independent people looking at that stage. And that's the assurance that you give when you put a business case forward to the department, that you've actually had the critical view of, is this the right thing to do? Do we have the right resources? Is there an affordability envelope? Do you have political and do you have citizens and community involvement at the very outset? That's the strategic outline case. It's mapped to the gateway review. We're not there yet. That's a piece of work that we've identified through this investigation to say we can do this better. And we can give, when it comes to DOF supply, if it needs to come, depending on the limit, DOF supply can say we've got an assurance that 3 people who have interest in this subject matter, whether it's rail, infrastructure, wind farms, anything else that a business case has, that someone has looked at that independently, who's done it before and can see that we're not too far off. So that's been set up. We have project delivery offices in each department who now collate all of the information. That's better reporting to the departmental boards, and therefore that's better reporting to the NICS board. So accounting officers who sit around the NICS board table will already have had a view of how their department is performing against their major capital projects. Some of those projects are unavoidable. Some of them just need to be done because of the safety of citizens. We then look at things like the school infrastructure. How are we doing that? There definitely needs to be repairs in schools. I think you've already had a report on maintenance from the NIAO. There's a lot of work to be done. How do we do that smarter? How do we do it more effectively? All of that work is now coming through the ISNI enabling actions. Action 7 I'm the SRO for, and that's for us to get an integrated procurement plan to see how we're doing this, how we're doing it now, how we can improve it, and how we can collaborate better. Now that work has never been done before, so this is really changing how people work, because people were comfortable to work within their department and not have to tell other people what they were doing. So we're now got that collective, how we're doing things and how we're approaching the market. And this feeds into the other reports. I think someone mentioned about 105 recommendations distilled into 12. Those recommendations include the fact that we weren't consistent to the market. We were going out with very different look and feel of documents, terms and conditions. That has all now been standardised through the ISNI Enabling Action 7. So that work has been taken forward. The recommendation 3 was about KPIs for CPD. They're now there. We're performing year on year. But where are the KPIs for the Education Authority, the Northern Ireland Housing Executive, NI Water? And we have, in terms of the analysis of the money being spent, most of the money is with 6 arm's length bodies. So it's outside of the civil service, which is where our control is. So we have to literally move outward of the Northern Ireland Civil Service to try and get into how the NI Water performs, and Northern Ireland Executive, Education Authorities and Health Trusts. And Scott Wilson, who's here through Brett, is doing a lot of that work in terms of how we deliver going forward. So the Enabling Action 7 will get all of those KPIs, how are we doing it, how quickly are we doing it, bearing in mind that the speed is time. Again, the membership of the Northern Ireland Civil Service Board, Jane's covered that, and then the committee has recommended, and this has come through a lot of reviews, about centralising the procurement function. We are a very small nation, we've got 9 COPs, 7 of those COPs are construction COPs. Can we do this a bit better? And what the root cause analysis report showed us was that there was key issues, and not so much of those key issues were about the structures, it was about how everyone was doing things. So that's where the Enabling Action 7, and I know I'm repeating myself, but there's a lot of hope pinned under Enabling Action 7, is that we will now look at an integrated procurement plan. So we don't have permission to do a central body for construction in Northern Ireland, but what we have permission to do is to make sure that we do it as common, in a way that's common, and look and feel to the market is the same. I know I'm taking up a lot of time. Do you want me to keep going through? Just very shortly.
Yeah, just a wee, because of an
Just a
awkward
wee,
question,
yeah.
just a wee.
Thanks.
I suppose one of the other actions was about the business case, the 5-case model, and there has been an interim review on that, which shows us that there's an improving picture, But even in our early analysis in the ESNE, what we're finding out is that even though the processes are clear, there's still a lot of layers of needs to be checked approval for very, very small amounts. And I think Patrick mentioned about an SRO event in November, which has already got 70 people who've registered for that. But what we will do there is to try and streamline that process. That may mean that delegated levels will have to be increased, and that will require a level of trust between arm's length bodies and their sponsored bodies, so that not everything is going to have to go through all the different layers of checking, and that should speed things up. In terms of the scale of delays and cost overruns, I think that was in the planning, and DFI have presented in front of the PAC in terms of their planning improvement programme, and we're working very closely with them to support on that. The SRO appointment letter has been amended about community and social licence. There was the NIAO did a report on judicial reviews, and I think one of the outcomes of that was that not the majority of judicial reviews aren't upheld. So what can we do to actually stop it getting to judicial review? And the answer there is a social licence. We need to involve the community at the very earliest stage, and I think one really good example of that is the Belfast Transport Hub. They really did engage with the community. They actually asked, in terms of social value, what would be your top 3 things that you want us to do? And the first thing was generational unemployment, and therefore they set up an apprenticeship scheme to make sure that people from the local area could get employment in the hub, and that has left a legacy in terms of that. The community engagement I've mentioned, and judiciary I've mentioned, so I'm getting through these rightly. And then 14 was the single year budgets. You will know if you've obviously been closely watching how the fiscal negotiations are coming through, and I'll let you talk to that, Neil. But in terms of the last one, in terms of standardisation, NEC4 contract terms, we have a really good relationship with the construction sector, and I hope that would come through if you're getting any evidence from them. But we do need to have a good working relationship. Northern Ireland is a very small place, and it's not an attractive place for most contractors to move. We really need to have that stability in Northern Ireland to make sure that we have good contractors and that we have good terms, and that the risk share, the apportionment of risk share, is actually appropriate. And I think we've moved really well ahead with that. I hope that's quick enough for you.
Trying to consume all that, you know.
Yeah.
I've never been so glad Sharon's here. Just quickly on the budget. It remains a very strong commitment of my minister and indeed of the Department of Finance, multi-year budgets as soon as is feasible, as soon as we can get a multi-year spending review from UKG. But even aside from that, we have a budget sustainability team set up now under Jeff McGuinness, and that's looking at working with departments to look at 5-year plans for our departments, regardless of whether the UK funding position is in place, but start asking those questions about what demands of our services are going to be, what are our costs going to be. So we're starting to move into a multi-year planning approach, even where we don't have the financial clarity to do so at the moment. But we are, UK government have certainly indicated their intention to move to a multi-year spending review. We might see that in the spring, and we'll be keen to bring multi-year budgets to the executive as soon as that happens.
Thank you. Sorry, your colleague wants to come in. But just really quickly, Sharon, you had made a point there just saying about it's not an attractive place for contractors to move to here in Northern Ireland. That's really worrying, because obviously demand, fee, supply, cost. Just on that point, could you just detail what exactly that is and just explore that a wee bit more, or what you can do to improve that?
We are working very closely with the industry, and a lot of it is about the future skills. Well, skills that we need now, but also skills into the future. And we have seen a lot of companies move outside Northern Ireland. We've just had an announcement yesterday. I think 11 billion has gone into the Republic of Ireland. You know, if you are a firm wanting to set up, you will go where there is a stabilised pipeline, which we don't have at the minute because we have no ISNE. And you will also want the surety that nothing is going to stop once it starts, and we've had a bit of stop-start over the last probably 10 years. So as a nation, we have to set a good stall out. We have to have a stable pipeline. We have to be able to move away from lowest price to tendering. We have to be able to make sure, and this comes back to the perception of, you know, lowest price or save money. You pay the true cost of delivery. You don't try and cut costs to make it look more affordable, and that's some of the issues that we have seen in the OBC, particularly if they've done a point in time and then we've had huge inflation. But what we want is a realistic pipeline with a good funding package behind it, and at the minute We don't have those. So that's what we need to set up to get an attractive proposition. into it.
Very important is to be a good customer. And as Sharon has said, we have to have the right challenge with our suppliers, of course, but we can't be in an adversarial situation. So the work that Sharon's been doing in terms of the engagement with the industry, with the sector, the way we're changing how we procure, pre-market engagement, really trying to build up strong relationships so that the industry believes this is prompt payments comes into that. Everything that we can do to be a good customer so that people want to do business with us. Some of those we haven't been able to deliver on yet in terms of long-term surety of funding, etc. But I genuinely think, certainly in the time I've observed Sharon's work, nothing beats having those meetings and those engagements. But we have to be a customer of choice, and we are proximate to two very successful and much larger scale markets. In which many of our local companies have proved incredibly successful, and all credit to them for that. But they are in a different scale to us, so it's really important that we create as easy to work with an image as we can.
Well, thank
Maybe
you.
If I just come
Yes, go
one,
ahead.
sorry, one more point on that. And I guess just an exemplar of how these issues are across departments, across all of Northern Ireland, you know, the impact it has from a commercial perspective. And we've talked about the potential lost opportunity costs for the projects that have been delayed, but also the realisation of the value they have presented is probably different than was presented in the business cases initially. Look at the Belfast Transport Hub and the opportunity it is now provided. But in terms of Department for Economy providing the skills that are required, but also them having the surety that actually construction can begin to build investments, and to Patrick's point, when we brought the investors under Joe Kennedy's leadership in last year, what message were they hearing on the ground regarding potential investments? So those areas that we need to look at, but also for the ambitions and our legal commitments in terms of climate change and net zero, plus also the opportunity for that transition from an economy perspective to sustainable energy by 2030. It all needs to work together. So not only is the structure of ISNI and the structure of the next board the right to address the issues which haven't done well, but actually there are probably arguably much more complex issues ahead which will need us to work in a different way, in a different environment, to actually stop very difficult things happening to us, but also to capitalise on the opportunities.
I appreciate that. Sorry, Cathal. Colin, and then back to yourself.
So the question's just prompted by something you said, Sharon, and now that HE has mentioned an element of it as well, and that's about how small a place we are. However, many of the key projects here expand beyond here, particularly into the south. So I'm thinking the A5, which has been mentioned repeatedly, that links to the N2 and the T10 or T11 in Donegal. Rail clearly is going to have to be on across the island basis. Water quality will clearly have to be addressed on that basis, and energy, which you've mentioned there as well. So are we appropriately linked into our colleagues in the south in order to ensure that that doesn't become another problem and rather opens up other opportunities? Is that streamlined enough at this moment in time, or are there concerns there?
Well, will I take that? Yeah. Well, there's been no concerns raised, but it would be for the likes of DFI, NI Water and TransLink and they do form really strong links between themselves, because it's obviously you can't stop your infrastructure at one point, it has to go. But again, enabling Action 7 and the ISNI projects, that will give us the oversight and that will give us the actual insight. Now, not a lot of people like sort of taking, opening the curtain and seeing what's behind it. That's what that is doing. That's what's given us the ability to do that. And certainly in terms of how that infrastructure goes beyond the north into the south is one thing that we will be taking forward. And they have, obviously, it's been announced of their major investment in infrastructure. They also can't stop at the border. Yeah. So it's in everybody's interest, so it is a win-win.
And I think just to build on that, in the draft programme for government, it does commit to our transport infrastructure, the All Ireland Rail Review, and looking towards that All Ireland piece, north, south, east and west. There is a commitment to work with, and it's draft consultation, with the expertise within the UK, the GD perspective, but also the south. On our board, as it happens, and it wasn't purposely done this way, but Patrick is based in London. Francis Rowan is formerly from the Irish government, so based in Dublin, and our head of people is from Northern Ireland, but is based in Basel. So we have that international development. I obviously have regular engagements with my colleagues in Whitehall through the structures under Simon Case, but also I have regular engagements with John Callan, the Irish government, and then we have our North-South Ministerial Council events as well. So there is, and those structures I know are being explored in terms of the waterways was identified as some of those projects that are coming for development, where we have common cause and common projects.
Thank you. Back to me,
Yes,
Chair Green for go. Right, okay.
Sorry, Catherine.
Right, thanks, Chair. No, just a couple of points, and I'll consume on that. I take it we've made progress in some of the things. Jim, just back to yourself, I mean, in terms of when you were here previous, because I was there myself, in terms of the memorandum of play and also the previous PASC report, recommendation 6, and it's about oversight bodies in the single body and it's not. So in terms of the Infrastructure Commission, just the definition of what is it exactly, and what's its remit, can you give us a...
Yes, and maybe Brett, maybe better to give the definition. I actually, prior to those 3 years, I was consulted when I was in the private sector on the establishment of the Infrastructure Commission, and obviously it was then included, it was under Department of Infrastructure Minister as a commitment under the COVID recovery plan, and as part of that development, again when I was newly in post, analysis took place between the Executive Office and Department of Infrastructure to analyse what options may be considered for an Infrastructure Commission, and those were provided for consideration for the Executive Office. It's obviously a ministerial decision, and that would be for the Executive indeed to opine on those areas. From our perspective, it's not for us to establish new commissions or provide advice. My role is to reflect, and as an official, what those areas are that we need to provide, and we're doing that in terms of the work that we're having at the NICS board and the ISNI subcommittee, but the appointment of a single oversight board, of which there, I reflect that's one of the recommendations, is ultimately a policy decision for ministers, for the executive, and we within the. I don't know whether you want to provide any further input, Brett.
I think that's a very good summary of where we've got to. I think it's worth making the observation that the new government in London has recently announced the abolition of the National Infrastructure Commission there, and that indicates, or brings into sharp focus the fact that there are various different infrastructure commissions. If you look around the world, the term Infrastructure Commission is applied to a range of different bodies, each of which has very different remits and responsibilities. So the paper that was produced and presented to ministers, one element of that was to identify the range of options that are available to the executive if it wished to establish an infrastructure commission. But the paper also correlated those remits and responsibilities with existing bodies, whether that's SIB or the Department of Finance or the Department of Infrastructure, to see what added value would an infrastructure commission in any of its various forms actually add. But that paper went in before the last government came to an end, and it hasn't been, as far as I'm aware, there's been no additional response from ministers to that paper since the new executive was established.
Right. Do you want to speak? No, Patrick?
No,
My question follow up just, and you can come in a minute, is the likes of the ISNI and the likes of an Infrastructure Commission not taking away autonomies from ministers or departments or anything else, or a single oversight body. I mean, you have to ask where plays that role and where's the value for money and all that. Because if you're going to establish or whatever, they have to be given a significant role in some respect, with respecting all those roles. And my question, would be, I mean, the value for money and all of that. Any commentary around what all that would mean,
I think Brett outlined, I guess, the roles, and there's different configurations. It can be an advisory function, it can be a governance function, it can be a direction function. So there's various instances of how it could be instantiated. There was analysis performed in terms of those options and where those are now being fulfilled and for consideration for ministers. But Again, that would be for ministers to decide those areas. We are within the remits of making sure that we're delivering value for money as Department of Finance through the procurement and CPD aspects, making sure that we're doing everything at our official level to do that, but ultimately establishment of new commissions is a decision for ministers.
And just finally, because I want to talk in the context of, and I know you said we've been up and down and in and out of the place. There's been a number of reports done down through the years in terms of ASC with good recommendations and suggestions. So it's not to say there wasn't information there. I appreciate when we get back up and going again, we look towards those recommendations. My point would be going forward then, in light of some of those suggestions, and it's down to a minister to accept them, which is fair enough, and I'm not challenging that in any way. My point now would be, and my final question, and here's one for you, maybe more over with a short, with a mandate of maybe 2.5, 3 years left. In light of some of the things we've talked about today, where do we see us in a 3-year period, in 3 years' time? Where would you like to see, in some of the discussions, some of the meetings we've had, where would you like to see us at the end of this mandate?
Well, obviously we are, so I serve my first Deputy First Minister and Secretary of the Executive. I think the Executive has made very significant progress in terms of being established those key deliverables which haven't been delivered over, I think that the investment strategy for Northern Ireland comes through was in 2011, draft programme for government consultation, those areas to make sure that we give commitment to make through, and those the fiscal floor, the sustainability budget, the fiscal framework. So those are key underlying aspects. I think our job as officials and execs is to make sure we deliver to the expectations of the Executive, and I have a very clear steer from ministers that is what they're about, to making sure we provide that delivery aspects. I think there can be appointing different people in commissions to provide advice, but I think largely the 105 recommendations, the input that the Audit Office has helpfully provided, the establishment of our non-execs to provide that challenge functions, I think we know the what, and I think we know the barriers. For me, it's now about the delivery and making it impact and being held accountable. I think the ministers have clearly outlined in the draft programme for government the need to reform and transform. That'll be part of the how we actually make that effect, but also the reporting on the progress we will be held to account. And I think in addition to the work of the NISRA independent stats, where we show how all these things come together, how your economic prosperity is linked to your infrastructure and your water quality, and all those things will actually provide a really sound evidence base to see where we are making progress. So I think the story, we've got next board in place. That's one small aspect. It isn't a panacea. It's not going to,
Patrick changed his name there.
So it's not a panacea, but it's a key structural element for driving that change. And I think we will be held to account in the next year, in the 2 years. I think this is the mandate of delivery. From us as officials, it will be for the Executive.
And from an independent perspective, having worked hard to set up the ISNI committee as part of the NICS board, we'd like to deliver as much as the what. One of the exciting things that we're doing is enabling Action 11, I think, is we're looking at an infrastructure needs assessment. So when we do a new ISNI in 2.5 years' time, we'll be even better informed in how we take that forward. I'd like to be able to come back to you with 12 enabling actions where I've made, the committee has made significant progress. And again, we'll have been reporting up and have been flagging issues to ministers and executives so that those things can be done. So as well as being an optimist, I like everything done yesterday. So we'd hopefully have made a lot of progress in this area in the next 2.5 years.
And likewise, this committee would like to come back with a report to say, listen, we've made progress here and we're moving to the next phase or whatever. But thank you very much for your responses. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Just before I bring David in, there was a report a press statement, in 2021 by Minister Mallon, who described the Infrastructure Commission as a game changer. So, in your opinion, do you still describe this commission as a game changer? And has the roles been defined yet? And what has been achieved?
That was obviously the Minister, who was Department of Infrastructure's opinion of that in terms of bringing forward that. It's not for me to opine on political policy decisions, and for me to provide advice on that. What we took, because it was a commitment in the COVID recovery plan, was the analysis with the lead Department of Infrastructure, with the Executive Office to present a range of options to show where the existing structures are currently delivering that and to provide that advice to ministers. It will be for ministers to decide, and I guess you'd appreciate it's not me to question a minister's judgment in their view on that, or indeed cut across an executive or the role of First Minister and Deputy First Minister.
Has the role of the Commission been decided and defined yet and drilled down? No.
No, there are a number of different options, and I guess you talk towards globally. There's a number of different ways to instantiate that. We analysed those. We tabled how that was fitted in, how that would potentially be given effect in the current structures, how it was to be given effect in some mechanisms, but that is effectively advice to ministers for them to make a judgment.
Still with them, that's great.
We're trying to change the game through the ISNI committee, but if another decision structure comes along, we'll work with it.
Absolutely.
Appreciate that, no thank you. Sorry, over to David Honeyford.
I get Phil
Neal.
We're joking earlier. Here, thank you all for coming in, and everybody's here to make life better. You've Sharon said, sort of, we want to deliver better, and we're all here to do that, and we're just looking through. But we also, on the other side of that, know that it isn't working or hasn't worked to date, and we're looking at this. I want to look at how the overcomplicated sort of commissioning and delivery of major projects. That it's, as various reports have said, kind of not fit for purpose. and we've talked about the issues, so I'm not going to go over that again. But I just want to go, what alternative models have you considered?
Yeah, and I think that was a clear analysis that was taken out through the kind of the root cause analysis, enabling and the processes. Is that how we commence with? Maybe Patrick, you want to reflect, and then Sharon, if you want to come in terms of the actions of which there have been substantive taken.
Well, again, and I'd need to go back and refresh what alternative models would mean. Certainly what I'm looking forward to seeing is we do some of this work ahead of the SRO event, and then in November, how things get commissioned. Departments, arm's length bodies, it's sort of 60 to 70% goes through the arm's length bodies. Are business cases going back and forth between the department and the arm's length body too often? There's a balance here. We want to progress, we want the accelerator down. We need to have appropriate brakes and checks and balances, and it's the balance between the brake and the accelerator, and it'd be a very simple metaphor I would use. And that will certainly be, my view will be within the remit of some of the enabling actions. So we'll be looking at the commissioning and whether, there are, delegated limits was something that Sharon was talking about a moment ago. So I'm all ears to hear if there's better ways to do things. What we'll do is we'll change the game and accelerate and deliver as best we can. And if we can make further changes, I'll certainly take that into the committee and through the board and advise ministers collectively.
There's certainly quite a lot of work going on at the minute. We've obviously moved predominantly to the 5-case business case model. We've done our interim review of that. We'll have a full review before the end of this financial year, all being well, and we'll make sure members are aware of the findings of that. Early evidence is it is improving, but it still absolutely depends skills and the quality of the people that are working on that. It's not the number of stages in it, it's the quality of information in it. And very key is making sure you have the right technical expertise at the most appropriate time. But one of the big areas we've been pushing on, and one of the things that the SRO event that's coming up that others have mentioned is talking about proportionality and where there is unnecessary material that's not required. There's lots of things can help us in that as we look into the future around AI and thinking about how we can make our documents briefer, tighter, so that we're not asking for anything that isn't required. But there's also a lot in the, Brett will probably want to speak to this, in the root cause review, incredibly helpful report from SIB for me and other accounting officers. And it points out just how complicated the legislation's becoming now. And with the length of documentation that's going to be required to be read for any planning application, and if we don't keep trying to work as a system to reduce that, to simplify it as much as we can, it's simply a fact that more things will potentially be there to slip us up or trip us up, because it's going to be impossible for everyone to read every page and every document in the level of detail required. So that proportionality approach that we've been taking to our business case work is something that's going to have to be required as we think through the complexity of planning legislation, and there's work with one of the enabling actions to look at that. So that kind of brevity of information is really, really important. Better dashboards, better indicators. Sharon will be able to speak about some of the new procurement methods that we're looking, what the new Procurement Act will give us in terms of flexibilities and how we can work in a different way to procure. I think there is a lot of progress being made, but the danger is you're always adding something else into the process, a new layer, a new document, when we really need to be looking in the other way and trying to say how do we get down to less stages, less steps where we can. Brett, I know you picked out in the root causes report the hugely increasing complexity around some of the
Certainly
legislative frameworks.
In planning law as well. I think there is a really important number of points to be made in respect of business cases. And I know a lot of effort has gone into the 5 business case approach and also into ensuring that those who are tasked with compiling those business cases have the skills, knowledge and experience to do that as accurately as possible. But I don't think, and our root causes report looks into this in some detail, that actually that is the problem. And in fact, if you were to summarise the problem, it's not that the business cases are inaccurate or that they aren't detailed enough. It's quite the reverse. It's perhaps that they're over-specific, that they're too detailed and they take too long to produce. Our assessment is that each of the business cases for major capital projects is accurate on the day that it is completed. The problem arises later because, as you know, the difference between an OBC and an FBC is an OBC is, as the name suggests, an outline business case. It is compiled at the start or very close to the start of a project. In particular, it is compiled at a point where the key uncertainties, and these are gone into in some detail in our report, which really affect how programs and projects progress, have been decided. And I'm talking here about planning, about procurement, about decision making, and about social license. And these are the most vulnerable processes in terms of external impact. It's affected by things such as delays in responses from statutory consultees, construction cost inflation, black swans like Ukraine, like the pandemic, like the absence of ministers, like judicial reviews, all of those things which nobody realistically can expect to predict at the time when an OBC is created. So the difference between an OBC cost and an FBC cost will show you the impact of those key uncertainties, as I say, in planning, procurement, social license, decision making. None of those are within the control of the SRO, and few of them are in control of under the control of anybody. So for those reasons, everyone who reads an OBC should expect it to be an underestimate. They should not expect it to be a fully accurate representation of what the costs are going to be at FBC stage, and certainly not at project completion stage. So one of the recommendations we make is that instead of having an OBC estimate as a fixed point of X million pounds, it should instead be represented by a range of estimates. If everything goes according to plan and there are none of the impacts that I've described earlier, then the cost will be £100 million. If, on the other hand, these other events take place and affect it, it could be as much as 3 times the OBC.
Can I come in? The question was simply, what alternative models have you considered? And you're talking about the process, you're talking about planning, you're talking about Ukraine costs. I know all those. I know all the reasons. I know all of that. And you said you're happy to look at. By that inkling, you haven't. So I want to know what alternative models. It's not the process. I understand the process. It's what models have you looked at, alternative?
Well, we did look back in 2013 at alternative models, and we suggested the centralisation of capital project delivery. And as you know, ministers declined to support that view. Since then, we've seen the establishment of centres of excellence which do concentrate related procurement expertise in one place and delivery expertise. So road service, for example, is a good example of that. And the establishment of the health estate service is another. But as I said back in 2020, the same benefits that can be delivered through centralisation can also be delivered through alternative mechanisms. And you've heard today how those benefits are being delivered in ways that don't require substantial reorganisation, which, in my view, would take up time and energy that could be better deployed elsewhere.
We haven't looked from 2013. at any alternative?
We have actually, we have part of that 2013 assessment was to look at how we centralise the standard construction, you know, the built environment like education, health and construction division in CPD and DOF. And education didn't move, but health projects moved into DOF. So in 2014, health projects moved into DOF. There was a review carried out in 2018 that said that wasn't a perfect solution. In fact, it blurred the boundaries between the accountability in terms of health projects from the Department of Health to the trusts. So it was actually a very disproportionate or a clumsy move, and that's probably a very misused the word, but it wasn't actually well fitted into Department of Finance. So to move a health project in Department of Finance in 2018, they said there's things that you need to do to try and improve this. So I took over in 2021 and I looked at it again, and the recommendations from the 2018 were still there. The benefits of, and I think one of the things that crystallised that was when the pandemic hit. The director of health projects actually moved out of DOF back into health to be closer to the delivery. So in 2022, health projects actually moved out of DOF back into the Department of Health, and they've given us, you know, the benefits of that actual move have been far more productive. The expertise is now closer aligned to the client. So it seemed like, and it was something that we wanted to try because of the centralised model, because it keeps coming back up again in all the recommendations. You just need to centralise. But I do think there are disbenefits to us as well, and that is moving expertise from closer to the delivery into the central function is not always the best way to do it. And as Brett said, within DFI, that's where the major spend, I think they're 30% of the spend in the civil service is captured under NI Water, Translink and the DFI Roads and Rivers as they were. So there is already a centralisation. We've looked at other jurisdictions in terms of how they do it, and in Northern Ireland, in the fact that CPD does all of the construction on behalf of the departments and prisons and the arm's length bodies. That is a huge amount of centralisation that exists here that doesn't exist elsewhere. All of those construction projects are in other jurisdictions are delivered out with the centre, and there's advice and guidance provided by the centre, but the actual delivery is out with. But the size of Northern Ireland, you just couldn't replicate all of that in all the different departments. Prisons may build 2 prisons in 10 years. So centralising it in terms of CPD construction division makes absolute sense. But moving all the different unique portfolios like health, education, Translink, rail, they deal with different sectors in the round. The biggest, what success will look like for me in 3 years' time will be an integrated procurement plan to deliver ISME, to deliver the investment that we are going to secure over the next 10 years. If we have an integrated plan, it should be agnostic about how that's delivered structurally, as long as it is an integrated plan that everybody's bought into. So that's my success. If I come back in 3 years, we have a plan that's actually working and everybody's bought into. And that is no mean feat. That is going to be a very difficult thing for us to achieve, but we are committed to actually deliver that.
And also that there's a centralised reporting structure annually, which is identified in the draft programme for government, to say, are we on progress to do that?
I think a big thing for us in the system, take the health project's a really good example, is just to be as agile as we can. So we tried that as an alternate model, seeded that work, we didn't bring everyone in, we just brought health, seeded it work. For the reasons Sharon said, it didn't really. Very quick decision, sat down with the Permanent Secretary in Health and said, I don't think it's working for either of us, no problem, staff were great, moved it back, and we've seen the benefits. But that was so I think to your point, we need to be open-minded to suggestions that come about whether it's new commissions or new structures. Try it quickly, see if it works. If it's bringing the benefits, great. If it's not, and that one wasn't for us or for health, quickly go back to the other model. So that was a good kind of test case rather than bringing everything in centrally and then finding we'd lost that connection to the customer, and we learned quite a lot of valuable lessons from that.
What I was just trying to get across is I'm relatively new in post, and again, you know, Sharon is clearly very expert in this and has looked at the different models. What I was saying is, if she has good suggestions, I'm very happy to support them and bring them through the committee. So,
have we identified good practice in other countries?
It is. We have to accept that Northern Ireland has 9 different departments, and I know that, you know, it's very difficult to relate that in terms of, well, that makes everything slower. It shouldn't be that way, but we can't take sort of what's happening in other jurisdictions and try and model it here if we have a completely different structure. But what we can do is look at what can be achieved, and it shouldn't be a substandard success. We should be able to deliver the same, because I do think since the executive come back, we can see a collective, we can see more ministries working together, we have more joint briefing, because economy has to work with communities, has to work with finance, has to work with health, because collectively we can deliver. In silos we can't. But we've looked at other jurisdictions, and as I said, CPD is actually a good model in terms of we are building, we are helping building prisons and office accommodation and CAFRE colleges and further education colleges. One of the other successes I forgot to mention was NRC, announced yesterday, a really good win there. So we have looked at models, and actually ours, whilst it may not be a centralised model, there is still work that we can do to make it better in terms of delivery. And I think that's what we need to focus on. I think if we get preoccupied with structures and how things are done or how things are structured, it's just going to take us away from focusing on how we actually deliver.
We don't need more process.
We absolutely don't.
You have 9 COPs, you talked about, you have outside bodies which obviously control a lot of this, and there's no kind of central vehicle. Is there a reluctance or an unwillingness to reform within the system?
I mean, it's a tricky one to answer in a way. I would say in my experience, no, not really. If there's a compelling enough... the health projects is an easy example to use, but if there's a proposition there to be explored and it's something we can plausibly do, I certainly can't say I've found any great reluctance to do it. It has to be a plausible case to explore, so open-minded to anything that might be worth. But what I've really taken, comfort's the wrong word, but if you read the root causes, if you read if I look down the list of all the money that we talked about at the start of this session, it's not sure to me a new structure would have fixed that in terms of, so there are planning, which is an enabling action, there is social licence, something we may pick up on, there are lots of things and lessons and ways we can do things better, skills, capability, but I'm not sure the structure is the biggest problem, certainly from what we've seen elsewhere. But I think, and certainly the examples I've had, staff just want to get things done. So I wouldn't say, I don't come up a lot against a lot of objection, but, we obviously test each one as it comes.
And again, back to my anecdote, I do a reasonable amount of management by walking around and listening to the SROs. They're absolutely keen to reform, make things better, make the processes slicker. So from the people who will deliver on the ground, I feel a great appetite and support, and I appreciate the focus that you're giving this, the NIO are giving, the committee's giving to this, Neil and I and Sharon standing up and saying, we want to make your jobs easier and better so the processes are slicker. I wouldn't say we had standing ovations, but with very warm welcomes.
And I guess we had most of our senior SCS and PermSecs together yesterday morning, going through, I guess, kind of from a leadership perspective, but what are our challenges in serving this executive going forward? And that acknowledgement of doing the same things we have done before. This isn't a kind of keeping the status quo position that Northern Ireland or indeed globally we're in, because the nature of the issues we're facing, global challenges, meeting net zero, our cost pressures, not enough money to deliver those aspects. There's acknowledgement that actually we can't do that in the current context, so we need new thinking. I think some elements of the transformation board, the interim transformation board, and that way to actually drive different thought patterns and actually different cultures and bidding for those will actually be part of that transition. So it's how we use those soft levers and soft powers as well as the hard funds and structures to drive that change.
You said, Neil said there a minute ago that it's kind of nothing stopping that and it's all great and reform's happening. So why are we here and why has nothing changed?
Well, I don't think it's fair to say nothing's changed. Some of these projects, obviously with the A5 decision yesterday, but if you think of those judicial reviews and the reason that those exist and the right and legitimate position that local people and groups can have to, I'm not sure you could go, I can't think of anything that we could have materially done as a service to have changed that process, and that's 50% of the overrun cost. So there is a significant individual story about each one that might relate to planning or delays to opening a hospital or whatever, that might not be things that I could sit here and genuinely say, if you could let me rerun the last few years, we'd have been able to change it. So I do think, and hopefully we've given a flavour of some of the things that have changed and are changing. Across the other, roughly, take the 11 out, 66 odd other projects, reckon the overspend, and this is comparing to OBC, and for the reasons others have said, that's probably not the best comparator, in the order of 600 million of overspend across 60 projects. Sounds like a huge number. In the world that we've just lived through of oil price inflation, etc., that's not, and certainly comparing it to, as we look at others, that's not as bad a scorecard as the overall figure would suggest. So although I accept that we are back because those numbers are the way they are, and I think it's recognised in the NIA report, there is progress, governance processes, better monitoring. I'm seeing it on the ground. And also we have to, and it's our duty, my duty, to make sure I take back to our SRO network that we're going to present to, that they still have our confidence and support, that if they have good ideas, if they want to drive it forward, we'll support them. I think it will take longer to see some of the changes, and I also think our better reporting will help committees such as this have better information to be able to determine how well we're doing, rather better in the future than maybe we've been able to do in the past.
Thank you. Cathal?
Thanks, Chair. Just a quick one, because for the number of years I've been in PSE, we've always talked about silo mentalities. You could argue that's autonomy for a minister or a department. So my point to you, it's not really a question, but I mean, arising from the conversation we had so far, is about partnership, and I mean that's partnership right across government. And I was right, you know what I mean? And whether it's not about changing the structure, maybe in some cases, it may be how we define that clearly to everybody. Jane, maybe it's a responsibility, or in some of the learnings and teachings, you know. So
I mean, that's why I'm here, because actually this isn't a silo.
No, 100%.
But I guess I hope that is a visible representation. That's why we have our non-execs, we have our ALBs through the SIB. But also we need to build that into the expectations for the service. It is built into the draft programme for government through the missions-based approach. These problems are so complex, we need to work together. It's built in through the work strands that are identified from the next board, but it's also built into the performance dimensions that I work with the PermSecs on, that they will have to have a corporate responsibility in terms of delivering those cross-cutting aspects. So on each of those boards, so obviously the ones that the major significant infrastructure spend are on the ISNI subcommittee, the people areas are covered by others, but we each have a corporate responsibility to deliver across those areas. And also, I guess, the strategically, the grades within the civil service, we need to give specialism where it is, right? But also there's a mobility of grades, so I've looked towards the grade 3s in terms of bringing through those soft aspects and move, from people who have worked in communities and understanding the need for that social inclusion into the economy, moving those across so you bring those networks and the connections to use every single lever that we have. But I have to say, I have seen with our executive, it's a huge privilege to serve them, real collective leadership. This is arguably, I would say, some of the hardest times, the most difficult budgets, significant political, geopolitical instability, making decisions, and to your point, Mr. Honeyford, I would say that they have made very substantial progress, but that had to be provided by input to officials to do that. They have a legislative programme, again, the work that was done in the absence of an executive to prepare for that, obviously at their decision. A budget was agreed. There is a draft programme for government. There is an ISNI strategy which has been consulted on and is ready to go for consideration in that aspect. There is an interim fiscal framework provided. Sustainability plan was presented today. We have an interim transformation board. We had 43 applications for that. That's instantiated. There's separate funding for that. There is in the programme for government the acknowledgement, which all my permanent secretary colleagues accept, of the need for fundamental transformation and reform. Doing the same things as we have done before will not get us to where we need to do. That's not to say what we did before was all wrong. We need to keep what was good, but actually the level of complexity of our problems, and it's not just with respect dealing with all the issues in the previous reports, it's about that forward-looking, hopeful aspiration of where we need to get to. And I feel very strongly that all the civil service is up for that challenge in terms of delivering that. And it won't be easy, and it'll be about people and cultures and tone and how we lead and leadership at all levels. But I very much do feel that we are in a very important phase now for Northern Ireland Civil Service with this executive to lead in that.
And certainly is an independent view, son of a Northern Ireland farmer and builder, so I know what a silo looks like. I've maybe seen the odds. I saw the hint of silos when I arrived, but I definitely think there's a journey to more collaborative, when the ISNI committees come together, I'm seeing best practice being shared. I'm seeing SROs. One of PermSecs brought an issue Disney committee a few weeks ago, and then at the board last week, and the minutes will show, asked for some help. We'll need a cross-departmental working group to achieve an important objective. So, yeah.
One quick remark on silos is, I think I've learned quite quickly in this role, is to understand why they exist, because people are so incredibly busy. So everything that talks about another group or another, people are worried about being able to fit it into the diary. So it's really important from a leadership point of view that we don't allow those silos to manifest, and try to take things out of the diary where we can. So I've often said to my minister when she came into post, I said, I will get you the best advice of the service, not from your officials, just wherever they're the best officials at. And to be honest, I've never run into that being a difficulty. So silos, I'm more sympathetic to why they exist. It's not out of any not wanting to work. It's a busy, and what do we have to do to fix that? Make sure we're only focusing on the things that really matter. So I've done a lot in my time in DOF, merging committees, merging groups, putting things together to say, let's meet. We now have a finance, HR and resourcing committee, affectionately known as the Fraggles group. And that's my finance and HR group. It put together 3 different groups so that people didn't have 3 different things in their diary that they then send somebody else, and it starts to create a silo. So you have to work very hard to not let them build up, because they will naturally, just because of people's busyness, and it's a big leadership challenge for all of us to make sure that they don't sneak back in.
And what if they're castles rather than silos? I know about silos from farming background too. But should we guard against the fact that they may be castles in some cases?
Well, I know nothing about farming, so I'm happier on castles. So
I work in a castle.
You will get my point that people are just protecting interests or reluctant to move beyond. So I think we need to be very focused on that, because it's a repeated factor here in this committee.
And I think,
yes.
So I guess obviously this is an official domain. It is about people. It is about cultures. It's about ways of working. What if I was, in the work that's done in the dashboards, and I guess you can get so much information that becomes actually meaningless because you can't interpret anything. What in this example for ISNI is actually taking the 110 and say, what are the key enabling actions, and what are we doing within the areas to affect those, and how our departments. So there's almost a hotspots area, so we can actually assemble into those issues to identify those areas and make meaningful progress, because actually some of it is about sharing best practice. I don't think anyone is out to actually have detriment for their delivery. They want to deliver best outcomes, and that's what a public servant's about. So I think those provide a framework for us analysing of where potential hotspots would be, and for us supporting that.
A good example of a way we've tried to deal with that is in a very complex issue. It's not. We've started to reach an approach where we've said, I've got together with a group of other Perm secretaries and said, right, let's put together a collective piece of advice for the ministers. That doesn't mean each department and official has to agree. You might be putting to your ministers, here are 4 options. Department of Economy agrees with option A or recommends A, Department of Finance, but the information and the data that builds those options should be consistent. And prior to that, I'd seen a lot of occasions where the document would have been in that castle, meant that we think, well, what is the respective from my department? Whereas what I've asked on a number of areas, much to Sharon's frustration, is can you just get us all the options across all the departments, put that to the ministers, and we can provide our own departmental recommendation, but it should be on the same paper that the other department recommends too, even if we don't agree on the recommendation, because it's ultimately a political decision, instead of 4 different subs into 4 different departments with the one lens on it. And that's quite a significant change, but I'm glad I'm sitting far enough away from Sharon.
Obviously all our civil servants operate under impartiality and evidence base, but it's the lens and impartiality of the department versus the overall lens. And I think the programme for governance, etc., is where our overall metrics. So it's not just the metrics for the economy will not be delivered in the economy. They need education as part of that. They need infrastructure. They need ISNI to deliver a core aspect of it, because you will not have investment. You'll not be able to build those unless those things are linked up. So the need actually to provide the input from other departments is now so compelling, in my view, that actually this is about how we support others. Getting the best outcomes for their departments requires a cross-cutting aspect.
We have a programme for government, not for 9 departments. We don't have 9 separate pages in there. We've priorities the expanding government. So I think, I've seen progress in the officials. Obviously they have their AO ministerial responsibilities, but they're collaborating across. I was fortunate enough to meet the FM and DFM. We're a relatively young democracy in that way, and it's been great that through the coalition, through the agreement, we're sitting and going, what is our programme for government? What is our investment strategy? So, that's why I think people on this side of the table and your side of the table are pleased to serve.
Thank you. I'm just cautious of time. I've only another hour and a half left, so I'll pass on. I'll pass on to Tom. He's going to take us. He's going to take us through about having the right skills and in the right place at the right time.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for coming before committee today. No doubt, key to successful delivery of major capital projects is dependent on the right people with the right skills. From the very initial stages of that project right through to the completion of the project, the lack of professional skills is a service-wide issue that has been known for some considerable time. Can you tell committee today what has or is being done to address that particular issue?
Maybe just going to hand over to Neil. I would concur with kind of the theme here is this is about people at the core of it, the right people doing the right things, and that's the job as a leader. I guess the steps that I've taken is regarding, I've talked about it, I want to rehearse it, bringing in some expertise in terms of non-exec to provide that challenge function, but also within the next board to recognise that ISNI doesn't operate in isolation and our programme for government doesn't operate, that there is that skills pillar of how we actually develop that workforce planning, and a key aspect of the root cause analysis and the enabling actions has identified those skills as being an outlining area, and that is an area where we've had substantive focus. So I'll pass over to Neil just to talk towards those progresses.
Yeah, I'm glad you raised it as a question. It's probably the one area that gives me the greatest concern because the skills required are in such short supply. There is short supply globally, they're in short supply locally, so we have to take a number of actions to try and make sure we have the right people, right place, right time. We have to look at training our own because we are competing against other labour markets who can pay significantly more than we can for many of the skills that we need. So we're looking at new apprenticeship models, we're looking at new training models to bring people through. In some of our procurement areas, we're really, really struggling to be able to bring in the labour. We're working on skills audits to look across the piece to see exactly where the gaps are, see where we can maybe share expertise that maybe is not needed at all times. We're also trying to make sure that we are as good a learning organisation as we can, hence all the SRO networks, etc., so that people can take the learning from colleagues. They can be better, maybe build up on a smaller SRO as a smaller project before moving on to a larger one. We also need to be very nimble because we don't always know all the skills that you need. You can think of the obvious things you need on procurement or delivery, but there can be things that bubble up along the way that you weren't aware of, that you needed very technical or specialist expertise that we'll never really need on a full-time basis. So we need to look to our ways to be able to bring that in. But when we look at our skills and capability and capacity work, again, helpful work from NIAO, it does tell us we've quite a journey to go on. We're looking at and trying to secure funding for more workforce modelling and analysis of what skills we need along the way. We also need to think about where we deploy people and when we deploy them. So, for example, going through a very difficult and challenging project can be extremely mentally, physically exhausting for that individual. And whilst we might sit here and say, well, the right thing is just to roll them on to the next most difficult project, that may not be the best thing to do, both for their well-being or indeed our chances of keeping them long term. So we need to think about how to use our skills appropriately, deploy it, lend it when it can be, and also make sure we can bring in the specialisms. So you are right to raise it, and I could point now to skills gaps and vacancies in the system that we can't fill. And that may curtail the level that we can deliver, the volume of projects that we can do. I think that's a very real concern that we have at the minute. But I also think that the response to that includes new apprentices, new training schemes, new training programs, sending people through the different procurement skill sets. That's not the only skill that we need, obviously, project management, commercial acumen, etc. So you can probably tell by my enthusiasm in the answer, it's a subject very close to my heart, is being able to make sure. I just want to be clear with the committee just how hard a challenge that will be. I'm not taking anything away from the absolutely fabulous people that we have in the system that I'm in awe of, but it is a competitive world for those skill sets, and those brilliant people are in huge demand outside of the service. So for my part, I'm also looking at things around what allowances we could look at, what retention schemes we might have to do. We're modernising and looking at our pay strategy. We have a programme of work there to look at that, pivotal allowances that are used elsewhere. So we're definitely progressing that, but I'm glad you raise it, because it is probably, as I said at the start of this session, it's people that are key to this, and the skill sets that are needed for ever more complex projects are becoming more and more technical and more skilled throughout that.
And maybe Sharon, do you want to come in as well, just with some of the programmes, notwithstanding the challenges, but the programmes that have been initiated in some of those areas?
I think I don't have the figures to hand, but we have over 60 people who've gone through an assessment and development centre, and that was the Cabinet Office initiative back in 2020. And this was when they were doing their capability review, and it was to try and find out where people's skills were. And then the difference there was you got a job if you were an A and a B, assessed an A and a B, and if you were C, you weren't put through to the commercial delivery. We didn't move that far, but what we did do was to use it as a way of assessing people's skills and where the skills gaps were. As I mentioned earlier, there are programmes, the Major Project Leadership Academy, the Project Leadership Programme, and those are programmes. Now, they are expensive, but we believe that as a resource, obviously it's an investment that is well placed, because if you have somebody looking after a 10, 20, 30 billion pounds project, spending a few tens of £1,000s to put them through a very skilled programme, not only the skills they will get from the learning, but it's also the networking they have with other SROs and other jurisdictions and project directors. So there are a lot of departments who are investing in that. As Neil mentioned, we do have vacancies, and a lot of the professions that we're finding struggling to recruit. Also, other organisations are doing mechanical and electrical engineers in short supply, quantity surveyors. In construction division itself, we have 129. We've got 26 architects, 15 surveyors, 34 engineers, 44 project managers who are skilled as architects, or they have their own discipline. But we have 30 vacancies, and we are finding it difficult to fill those vacancies. I am heartened, because we ran a new entrance event last week in the Pavilion, and there are people coming to the public sector who were in the private sector but see this as a good proposition in terms of work-life balance, and also the diversity and range of skills and projects that they're working on, from a Caffrey College to a prison and anything in between. So there's a really good proposition to come and work in the public sector, whether it's in DFI. Now, DFI have, as we got our last stats, over 90 vacancies. They are struggling to attract, and they have, you might have heard in the recent announcement of a civil engineering academy, because where we can't bring the skills in, we will have to grow our own, and there's a long lag in that. There's maybe 3 years, but at least when you get that person in, they get the variety of the work, and then they're loyal to the purpose, because when you join the civil service, you don't come for a massive pay package, you come for the purpose of delivering for the citizens. So everybody is here to do their best. And we are seeing some of that turn, even though it is a very buoyant employment market out there. And I do think we also have to realise employment is very fluid now. I have 3 sons, and each of them would move for £5,000, whereas previously you come into the civil service, it was a job for life. And you don't even have to apply for a job. You're literally getting those LinkedIn, I see what your skills are, come and work for us. So the civil service have to recognise that we will always be in a recruitment phase. We will always be recruiting these types of skills. And the work that Neil's doing with the people in organisation development is we need to be more out there. If you have these skills, put your CV forward and come and work for us. We're not there yet, but certainly we do spend a lot of time recruiting. Procurement officers, we went out for graduates. We had over 350 applications for 10 jobs. So there is a demand. Now we have to take those people through a 3-year training programme, which again is very costly. When we get them trained, their skills are so transferable that we can lose them, either the private sector or the other public sector organisations. So we're constantly having to do this, and for me it is about making us look as an attractive employer as possible, to make sure we bring people in, and when we get them in, we keep them for a bit of time, and then we go through it all again.
Just to build, on those areas about the need for us to be an exemplar in Northern Ireland. So we talked about the academies, which actually were developed by Department for Economy but delivered in the economy. So we took those models and we applied them in the Executive Office and in Department for Economy to bring in people to train, and I guess it's scaling that model that's been done the last couple of years now. That's been provided in infrastructure to make sure that we're scaling that. I think that the need for us to recognise it's a different proposition to come into the civil service. You know, for me, I've got 3 children, and it's all about making a difference in the world. That's what they want to do. And there is nowhere better you could work, I would argue, in the world than actually the Northern Ireland Civil Service ability to make a difference, because the size and scale of what you can do, but the impact that you can make. So, but we know that we need to refactor that proposition, because actually we will not get this just with a kind of a pure salary level. We know we cannot be competitive in terms of those professional posts, but also the other aspects in terms of our payment to our SMEs and our sectors and our social value, how we can model those things that need to be delivered at all Northern Ireland level.
So the comment I was going to make is thank you for asking the question. And you know, the report, when I applied for the role here on the board, the thing that struck me most was the NIAO report on culture and capability, and the fact that we have a very significant proportion of our civil service which is probably within 10 years of retirement. And I go, so you have to do workforce planning? Glad Neil answered in the way it was, because when he said he wasn't sleeping, he was afraid I was going to badger him again on it. But I'm pretty focused on that one on a service wide, but also in terms of what we're focusing on today, major capital projects. Enabling Action 1, Enabling Action 2 are about people. It's about getting the development of the infrastructure profession, so working with Sharon to make sure that the people that turn up in the SRO room, we're hiring their successors, we're growing, we're developing them, and you know, working not just with the civil service but also the arm's length bodies who do a lot of the capital projects. So we're looking out, we're chatting to them. Scott was mentioning to me today, I'd been out to chat to them about their workforce planning. So who's going to be building the schools, the hospitals, the roads of the future? So that's what Enabling Action 2 is about. So music to my ears, because it's absolutely critical. If you step back and strategically and sort of pick up that report and you go, we need the right people in the right places.
Just to build upon the workforce that's required with the skills that's needed and to close that gap that's there, what engagement do you have with colleges or universities to ensure they're delivering the programmes that's required for these people to come into these types of work and jobs?
Yes, we're doing a lot of work with DFE, and this is not just the private or public sector, because I hope you have the SNE enabling actions. If not, we'll send them to you, because we've been talking a lot about them, and I realise that you might not. Do you have them? No. Okay, we'll send them to you. The first one is about a workforce plan for the public and private sector, because the public sector cannot do this on its own. And back to the question about silo working, even if we get it fixed in the public sector, without the private sector partnership, we will deliver not very much. So we are working public and private. We're working with CEF and the Northern Ireland Construction Group, and we've had DFE in the room. We're talking about CITB as well. Sorry, all these acronyms. The Construction Industry Training Board. Who are working really collectively together, because we have to attract these skills. And whilst the public service may not look attractive, but the construction sector equally doesn't look attractive, we need more females, we need more engineers. A lot of the engineers are moving on to software development because it's hugely lucrative. So we're really working with the private sector and DFE to try and move this forward. The construction sector themselves, give them really good compliments on their future skills document and what they're doing with the colleges and what they're doing in regions as well, to unlock some of the talent that we're not getting to, because a lot of it is Belfast centric. So it's how we move out with the regions, and then how we use the regional college networks to make sure that we have the courses available that the employers want. So there's a huge amount of work. In the universities, looking at the number of quantity surveyors, those classes are starting to grow. I think there was headcount restrictions in some of them, but we're now seeing that we need more QSs, we need more engineers, and the universities and the colleges are starting to fill those gaps. But it's work that we will have to continuously do. But DFE are taking the lead on that.
We're very lucky in that regard locally, because very strong institutions, and actually probably the last 10 years, the relationships they've built up with industry in providing bespoke courses and training, either through the FE or HE network, we're able to, it's not a new model for them, so we're actually finding that a very easy relationship in terms of talking about what type of training we need, and they're very proactive, so there's certainly no complaints on our side about the willingness or capability of the colleges and universities to step forward once we can. As Sharon says, it's been able to combine with our colleagues and friends in other parts of public service, or indeed the private sector, to work out where there's a quantum of demand for a course that might not be if it was only us that was the customer. So that's why we have to have all those partnerships. But we are very lucky locally that we have such locally focused institutions very willing to provide and support us with bespoke training, etc.
You seem to have a problem like what all most other sectors have. Somebody comes in, they're trained up, they stay a while, they move on. Have you looked at any incentives to keep those people with the skill set that you need to, so that they will remain with you rather than moving on somewhere else?
We have, and we've a full review. A coming attraction is we're doing a full review of our pay strategy, and in all its guises, what type of pay we offer, what type of other incentives there are working in public service, pensions, hybrid working, etc. But also looking at the possibility of retention and recruitment allowances and where they're required. But as Sharon has said, some of it's about the purpose, and one of the things we'll have to get, and we have a long way to go, is to be more agile in letting people come and go. If you go to the most successful economies in the world, spend time in economies that we might aspire to be like in Scandinavia and New Zealand, if you go into public service there, you'll meet a lot of people who've been in private sector, been in public, been back again, maybe PhD. We don't have that kind of flow at the moment. So we need to make it a little bit easier. When we think of some of our people going, we might have to think of them more being on a career break than leaving the service. And I think that modern approach to how people might have 2 or 3 stints in public service may ultimately be more successful than trying to necessarily keep them. We can really benefit from people who've had a experience in another jurisdiction or in a private sector, but can we have an easy and open door for them to come back? And that requires quite a modernisation around some of our HR policies and processes, but we are looking at that. So a combination of trying to keep people, but also a combination of making it easier for people to come back or be with us for a while, because I think the future world will be a lot of curious workers who want to have experienced what public sector work is like, and we need to make that easier for them to do so.
Yeah, and again, you will be aware that in 2010, this committee put forward a recommendation that there would be a register of public sector staff with a project and programme management skills and expertise put in place to ensure that future projects would benefit from this pool of experienced and skilled staff. What progress has been made in that?
Not as much as I would like. We've been fortunate in the past that some of the very specialist skills, people who've been to MPLA, etc., it's a small quantum of people, so the system's able to sort of almost, we can almost hold that in our head. But as we design our new HR and IT systems, the famed Integrate project, one of the requirements in that, certainly from us, one of the design principles will be about holding that kind of training record, if you like, better. We are looking at the minute about ways of we've built up talent biographies at the senior level so that we record those skills, but I wouldn't say we have it across the system in the way that recommendation would have suggested and that I would have liked. We have done it at the senior level, which is a good start, but we don't have that, if you like, learning passport or record of everybody's skill set. We rely a little bit more on those individuals putting themselves forward or being known in the system, and that's not ideal. So yeah, work to do in that area is the honest answer.
Okay, thank you. And you have an understanding, I take it, of the current skills that's already available across the system and what is needed to successfully deliver the major projects. Have you conducted a skills gap analysis across the system?
There's more coming on that. We do have some within individual, we look at it within, so for example in a project that I'm in charge of on Integrate, we did exactly that to look at what skills we needed to deliver it, but some of our enabling actions are actually to take a look wider. Sharon hit on the very important point earlier. Typically we would have done that in the past just looking at the NICS, and that's not going to be the right question because so much of the capital projects are delivered through ALBs. So we're now working through on the enabling actions. That work's now kicking off to try and get I think the one thing we have to do, we have to be cognizant of the fact that the skills needs are always changing. So we have to find a fairly agile way of being able to do it that we can update quite quickly. How often we find people coming back and saying, here's a new skill that I didn't know I would need in the same quantum or a new skill set that's required, or a new level of environmental economist or whatever it might be that you didn't think you needed when you started out. So I think it's important we keep that on track, but that's 2 of our important, I think that's enabling actions 1 and 2 under the people area.
Yeah, and we've 359 staff across the service who are registered project managers, but across the Copes we've almost 200 vacancies. So to me, that's a pretty big skills gap. So we need to fill that.
Well, to address these issues, have you got a target set to address them? Or, you know, is it the case that you come back here and say 6 months, a year, 2 years' time, and we're still sitting at the same situation that we're in today? Or have you got a specific target set that we're going to try and have this addressed by this particular time?
We'll see that through. The straight answer is no, we haven't set a specific number target for the reason that in some cases we've been out many times and we're now starting to have to go back to the drawing board and ask whether we're ever going to be able to attract that particular skill set. Maybe we need to profile what we do or buy that service in. So we don't have a specific number, but what we will have is much better and stronger reporting on where those level of vacancies and supply gaps are.
And this is, you know, and that's why I commented about the service-wide workforce planning and then the workforce planning for the major capital projects. I've offered to Neil and the People and Organisational Development team that I would like to take the infrastructure profession through as an early example of where we can do the workforce planning across the NICS and the ALB. Because if we come back here in 2 or 4 years' time and say the 200 vacancies has become 400 and we can't deliver the projects, you'd go, not great work, Patrick, and I would agree with you. So I wouldn't like to have that conversation.
And of course, perhaps maybe Brett, but SIB has been a key source for that strategic resource in there, and I think the framework within the ISNI subcommittee is actually employing that expert resource across the service to say where are the problem spots, where do we need to bring that expert. Perhaps it doesn't have to be for the entire duration of a programme, but where have we seen this before, how can we crowd in to actually ensure the delivery. I don't know whether you want to comment, Brett?
Yeah, SIB exists to, in part, to provide expertise which the NICS doesn't have, or which it wouldn't be sensible for it to provide, given that it's required at a very high level for a very short period of time. And as recommended by the PAC, we will continue to do that. And I would absolutely emphasise the importance of creating, in connection with the ISNI, a realistic workforce plan that identifies the resources required to deliver that plan, because without it we are obviously going to run into a great deal of difficulty if we're not preparing now to have in place all the resources we need to deliver those projects successfully.
Okay, thank you. And one final question, Chair. The business case process was streamlined since 2020 with a 5 new case model has been put in place. What impact has the change to this business process had on the delivery of major capital projects?
We've done the interim review, and that's a sort of, the early indications are positive, but we will need the fuller review, which we'll have before the end of this financial year. We'll be happy to share. Most of the projects we've been talking about today obviously existed under a previous business case model, so it does take quite a bit of time to be able to see what effect that they're having, and there was quite a challenge to transition to that shorter. What the business case model, the attention's often going down from 10 to 5, but the real focus on it and what the early recommendations of our interim report have been, the key thing for us is documenting and recording where external evidence has been brought to bear on the key. If you really think about a business case, it hangs on a number of very key pieces of information, key assumptions or key estimates that you've made of the number of people that will use a facility or the number of jobs it will create, and where do you build that evidence. And very often that's something you have to call on to external reports or external expertise. And one of the early findings of the report is documenting that is absolutely critical in making sure that the business case stands up. So lots of learnings. What I think it's improved is they're certainly getting shorter, which is good. We think that the quality has improved, but it'll take the bigger and fuller evaluation when we look more broadly, and we'll have that before, all being well, before the end of this financial year.
Chair.
Thank you. Just wanted to touch on skills there. The Department of the Economy has really released again the Skill Up programme. So with what you're saying there in terms of gaps within skills, particularly in major capital projects, have your concerns fed in, or have you had conversations with the Department of Economy to make sure that they're providing those courses?
I have had conversations because that was brought to my attention probably a month or so ago. and I contacted the person in DFE, and we've got another contact after that. They are obviously aware of the skills shortages, because construction is a really key employer in Northern Ireland, so they are aware of the skills shortages. But yes, I have made those contacts. Yeah,
I've seen a number of projects there which are what you're saying in terms of where the skill gaps are. There's programs there that are available, but it's how that is promoted to make sure people are actually taking and availing of free upskilling courses.
absolutely.
And I think that's obviously a key driver as well. So no, thank you very much. So we're going to go on to legal challenges now, so I'll pass over to Colin.
Yep. Thank you. So I want to move us on to legal challenges, and also to the issue which yourselves have mentioned several times throughout around social licence. And I am going to use the A5 as an example of this, because I think it's particularly relevant and germane at the present time. The reason I was late into the meeting today was because I'm just coming from St Kieran's, where Minister O'Dowd had went to address the pupils in relation to his announcement. And that was based largely off the fact that he had met a group of them last week here in the Senate chamber, at which one of them, Lucy, had asked him, why don't you get on with it? Appropriately challenging, and that's totally fundamental to what we're discussing here today. I also want to commend the rest of the students, Kieran and Dervla, their head boy and head girl, for the campaign they fought. And just to remind people that a lot of this emanates from a demonstration which the school held on a particular date, and in my view, not to build social licence, but to demonstrate the fact that social licence already existed and community engagement wishes were there. Very tragically, one of the students who took part in that, Camille Weitkonskite, lost her life within 48 hours of taking part in that, lost her life on the A5 herself. So it's been very clear in our community for a very long time that there is huge social licence and social buy-in to the for the A5. Our community have understood the need for it for a very long period of time. But we do get a sense from other evidence sessions here that there can be either a reluctance or an inability to effectively engage with communities around building support for these projects, which then lead to delays and increased costs. So, is there an understanding of the importance of social licensing and meaningful community engagement, and what has been done since our last report that demonstrates meaningful improvement in that respect?
I just want to reflect, and then I'll bring in colleagues. I think there's analysis on both sides, but just to reflect, I guess, the opening remarks when we talked about the 44% overrun, and those are significant sums of money, but actually it's people's lives that are affected. It's Camille's, it's the other 55 other people who sadly have passed in that way, and that is the real impact that we as civil servants need to support in terms of making sure those things never happen again. Also in the budget position, and we talk, and obviously we don't have Department for Infrastructure here to discuss that, but of the overrun of that budget, that was the largest proportion. It and the maternity hospital comprised the majority of that overrun. The rest was within 600 million, which is a 10% factor. So in some senses there's big numbers that you can take, but actually when you drill it down, and of course the underlying aspect of that was in terms of that policy, that legal challenge that was there and facilitated. I probably take just advice on what the best way in terms of addressing.
I'll come back to the legal element of it, but I would like an answer on the social licence.
Okay.
Do we get it yet, and are we using it effectively?
I'd come in on that partly because it's probably one of the most, when I read the root causes report, it was probably the piece that stood out so much to me. And being absolutely frank to the committee, I would have thought of us doing that through some of our consultation. It took that language and me to study it a bit more, look at the French model, understand what it really means to be doing it and doing it well. And it needs to be a dedicated strand of the work. It's not running a consultation. And I was one of the people who would hold my hands up and say, I needed educated on what that took. That report, I got Brett to come along to my board to speak to all of my colleagues to talk us through what the potential there is. I still don't know the answer as to what way we would set up the right model for that. But I think it's one of the most profound findings at the minute to say we have some different areas that have terrifically close and really good social engagement and community engagement. But social licence is more than that, and it's about, and I certainly was one of the people, and if I took a journey to go on, I'm unlikely to have been the only one. So whilst it seems like an easy thing to recognise, I genuinely believe and took some extra advice so that we could, as a department, think about doing that much better. And I think as a system, we'll have to think about whether there's anything French model or otherwise that we need to do to bring it in, because it's clearly, I mean, these are public services for our citizens, so we need them at the heart of that delivery. And I think I certainly took a lot of lessons, and I would humbly say I don't think I would have grasped the importance of it as fully as I should have. And I think the root cause report and some of the recent tragic examples help us understand that. But we've seen some really good projects where we've done it well. But
can you give us an example of one?
I think the transport hub. I think the transport hub is a really, really good example where a lot of difficulties could, because of just the location of it and the fact that they engaged with the community and they said, look, we're going to incorporate social value here. What are your top 3 things that you want to see leaving a legacy for this? And that helped sort of get through some of the other problems that were probably, that could have stopped the project in its tracks. And they were able, because of their engagement with the community representatives across the area, they were able to get through those problems very easily. Well, not very easily, but a lot easier than they would have had they not got that social licence. Now, as we got the root cause analysis report, we're also doing an update on the PPNO 121, which is scoring social value. It was one of the first procurement policy notes under Minister Murphy, who was the Finance Minister in 2020 to 2022, and we're amending that, and part of that amendment will be to incorporate the mandation of a social licence for relevant major projects. And then one of the enabling actions here will be that we develop guidance to make sure that when people get that mandation, it doesn't slow everything down, that it actually works. And we believe that investment up front, because it is about getting the fundamentals right when you set up a project, and one of those fundamental parts is the social licence, as well as it is getting the right people in the right time and having the funding stream that is guaranteed that show this project is viable, it will work, and we're committed to actually putting a tender out, getting a tender back, and construction starts.
Yep. And indeed, I would like to see that social value as part of the overall social licence, which effectively to me is public buy-in and public support.
100%.
You know, sometimes we over phraseology things, but it's about public buy-in, public support, and that then leads me to the legal part of it. And while I fully respect people's right to access through the courts and that, part of this is about proportionality and, you know, assessing where the correct balance lies, where you have a massive public need and public support, and that we have a system in place which allows people to challenge effectively, but which doesn't necessarily allow gridlock on key projects for all time and repeatedly. And back in 2020, when this committee first considered this topic, we heard that legal challenges often add time and cost to major capital projects, as has been the case. The memorandum reply on this subject made reference to the NIAO report on judicial review. That report found the number of applications is decreasing. However, but it noted, and this is the key part, the data is not collated in a way which enables cross-system learning from legal challenges. So my question would be, what lessons have been learnt, and how are these lessons being shared so they're not repeated?
Can I maybe come in and hopefully I'll get this right. Hopefully we are going to get through all 12 of the enabling actions, because enabling action 12 is 8 is social licence. It was Brett's report that brought it home really clearly to me. But to me, one of the things I learned in my management career was, if people feel change has been done to them, they'll resist it. If they realise it's for their benefit, they'll support it. So I absolutely get the social licence and support it, and it's one of our 12 priority actions. Just in terms of the legal challenges, and again, it's right about the proportionality, and some very good work in Brett's report on this. The challenge is brought for one reason, and then the thing gets pulled down for another process reason. Is that proportionate? I'll leave that question there. But I think you were asking about lessons learned. One of the things that Neil has, just as I've insisted about workforce planning, he said, I would like a report from the DSO, the Departmental Solicitor's Office, on a regular basis to the report to say, what challenges are we getting, what lessons are we learning? So I'll credit Neil for making that a focus.
Make sure that's hand-sorted. I don't get credited for much. I would say, joking aside, yes, yeah. If you just say that again louder, please. For the one of the things we're trying to bring now to the NICS board is a regular sort of lessons report from our internal auditors once a year, from our head of our information management, CSIRO group, and from our legal services. We do have and run training from DSO out of DOF about preparing for and how to avoid judicial reviews, what sort of information you should have, how you should handle that. And the team there do an excellent job. They've just recently done some training for DAERA. Now, I can get you more material on that. We as DOF don't tend to deliver, so I don't get as much of that to my board as regularly and frequently, but they do come around, provide training. But as Patrick says, what we're also going to be doing is bringing to accounting officers' attention, well, what's the learnings across the system from this year? What have we learned that maybe you haven't experienced yet, but you might be about to? But I do think the two things are connected. The better we do social licence, the better it does mitigate to some extent. And the second thing around a lot of the judicial review process is we are still in the infancy of really understanding how we're going to deal with climate change effectively and fully. It's bringing a lot of new complexities to the legislation. We're going to having new budgetary frameworks to work within, and we would hope that that will become a clearer environment to work in, excuse the pun, going forward. But that's certainly challenging both the legal system and indeed us in terms of clarity. But yes, to reassure you, we do have through our DSO team training going out, training offered to departments, and we'll be bringing an annual report as well so that we can see what the system is taking from the things that we've got right and the things that we haven't done so well.
And I guess also within the draft programme for government, there is a transform and reform aspect. So there's things that we should be doing better, enhancing or bringing those areas in, but it's maybe areas that need to be considered for reform or for transformation and those focus. So some of those bids in from departments, looking at different ways within a ring-fenced structure and a confined space to deliver those levels of reform. And perhaps Brett wants to comment. I mean, the level of complexity in the analysis that was done, very detailed analysis on terms of those kind of the legal challenges and the findings from the judiciary in terms of complexity of looking at the cross-cutting aspects.
Yep. One of the root causes of delay in the delivery of major capital projects is undoubtedly the complexity of planning law and the growing complexity of planning law for reasons that Neil has just explained, with the application of Climate Change Act and obligations arising under net zero. So unless action is taken to address this complexity, we will see more challenges. As Mr. Gildenew said, if you take the A5 as an example, there was a strong social licence. There was a strong local community support, but there was also a much smaller but very vocal and extremely active opposition for reasons that are well known. And the issue we have is that we have two mechanisms by which objectors can make their objections known. The first is through the planning process, when they explain the reasons why they think there are better alternatives, and the law puts in place objective and independent mechanisms by which those objections can be assessed. And in the case of the A5, those were considered in the proper manner, and the decision was taken to grant planning permission. Unfortunately, at that point, a separate system kicks in, which is where the complexity of planning law is so important, because the objectors are then able to seek a judicial review of the decision to grant planning permission. And because of the staggering complexity of planning law, that is becoming easier and easier to do, to identify some tiny flaw, some technical procedural flaw that will lead to the quashing of that planning permission. And as we saw with the A5, in the case of the 2012 planning application, the High Court squashed the planning permission on the grounds that one element of the environmental habitat regulations to do with a particular type of salmon had not been addressed correctly. And the cost of not building the A5 in 2012 and having to wait and build it now is measured in billions of pounds. But as you made clear so eloquently, it's also measured in lives lost. And the question is that a proportionate approach? And I think most of us would agree that while we need to provide opportunities for members of the public to challenge the executive, it should be in a way that is proportionate and doesn't lead to these disproportionate consequences. And you'll be aware that this is a growing problem. The A5 is one example, but Casement Park was challenged by way of judicial review. The Southern Regional College at Craigavon, the project was stopped by way of judicial review. The ARC21, whatever you think of that project, it has been going for over 13 years and has been challenged regularly by judicial review, not on the merits of the projects themselves, but on the technicality of whether every single step has been followed correctly. Now, the consequence of this complexity and the consequence of proposers and developers of projects seeing what is happening is that they are making their applications more and more voluminous as they seek to address every possible challenge that might be put forward and to make sure that every single T is crossed and I is dotted. And the growth in the volume of the size of planning applications is quite remarkable, and some of the figures that we found in the course of our study were shocking. The planning application for a further education campus at Craigavon contained 5,000 pages. A non-contentious wind farm application contained nearly 14,000 pages. The Stroul Shared Education Campus had 550 separate documents in it. And just as a coda to all of that, the training manual for the planning inspectorate, who are charged with administering, contains 3,240 pages. Simply to read these documents would take months, but if you factor in the time taken to draft them, to review them, to put them through the lawyers, to hand them over to the planning officers, for the planning officers to read and to assess them, it becomes an extremely arduous task, and one that adds considerably to the length of time required in order to deliver the assessment. And then it provides an enormous opportunity for people to challenge that assessment because of the level of detail that has to be gone into. And it's not just myself that's saying that. In the course of the Court of Appeal ruling on the Southern Regional College, the judge drew attention to what he described as a maze, a legal maze through which the planning officers had to chart a course. I emphasise it was the Court of Appeal that was deciding that issue, which means that previously a High Court judge, learned in law, had made an error in his interpretation of it. And yet we expect a planning officer on 40,000 a year to make a better decision or as good a decision as a High Court judge on £200,000 a year can make. And it is unsustainable. So change has to come. But that change is going to be fundamental. It will require changes to the law, and that is beyond the competence of my colleagues sitting here today.
Task for another day, Chair, I think, but it's useful.
Chair, but that's excellent, Chair, because at least now we've identified about 95% of them. There's a few more to go, because that's all the information we need. And we have debates in the Chamber the other day as if we're going to change planning law like that there. But these are the discussions we're having. This is the information we've gathered. Because, you know, I was planning spokesperson for years, there's nobody knows the better, but there's a lot of complications, but at least conversations like this, it draws it out.
To commend, I guess, the SID and obviously the independent ALP, the level of data and analysis that went in, and perhaps you might call it the root cause analysis, to inform, and data is key because you can use numbers and everything else, but drilling into it and you can have a view that those objections were based on some other, perhaps, and perhaps there was genuinely and legitimately held objections, but actually the process that allowed that to happen was not addressing those issues. So I think that's
and fundamentally we must address these issues in order to progress some of the important projects that we need to deliver all the benefits around prosperity and environmental improvement. All of those
and that's why transforming and reforming is fundamental to the aspects.
Thank you.
Thank you. Just in terms of the root cause analysis, we don't have that. Could that be sent to the committee? Would that be okay?
I can send the printed copy, but I can also refer you to a copy.
Send the shortened version, please.
Yeah.
Good read, actually.
Brilliant summary. There is a copy in the Assembly Library.
Okay. Thank you very much. So if we move on then, cost and time overrun. So it's going to be with Patrick and Diane. So
Yeah, can I just follow on, just on columns, just to fully explore recommendation 13 on the previous PAC report. Just it's in terms of working where the civil service recommended to work with the judiciary on this. Has there been progression? Is there planned to be more progression? And is this being taken seriously by the judiciary?
Obviously, we don't have Department for Infrastructure. You have identified the planning improvements aspect. I'll maybe ask Sharon to kind of discuss kind of where those elements are, but more broadly to bring Brett in terms of the analysis that needs to be moved forward. But maybe if you want to start, Brett.
It is another aspect of the problem in that if you take an example I gave earlier, Southern Regional College, it took 2 years for the High Court judge to deliver his judgment in that case. And even if his judgment had been upheld and we had progressed with that project during the 2-year period that it took to deliver the judgment, the costs would have risen in sums that are measured in millions of pounds. So it would seem to me to be a very good investment if we were to have more judges who could deliver these judgments in shorter times. But that is not a matter which we ourselves can, or I certainly can, have any influence over. But it does demonstrate the importance of sensitising the Lord Chief Justice and the other elements of the judicial system to the consequences of the restrictions within the judicial service. Yeah.
Thank you. And but it's just specifically in terms of that recommendation where this committee recommended that the civil service work with the judiciary to consider whether there should be a higher bar with this and if there's working together. So has there been working together on that?
If we take the memorandum of reply, the Department of Justice partially accepted the recommendation. Their view was that they couldn't accept the recommendation insofar as it related to the NICS working with the judiciary on the test for judicial review. Their view at the time, it's for the judiciary to apply the law as it stands, and outside a court setting it would not be appropriate to engage with the judiciary on how the law is applied or if the right balance is being struck. However, it was agreed that DOF and DOJ would work with the Northern Ireland Audit Office when the Judicial Review NIAO report came through, and one of the actions there was that the DSO, Department Solicitor's Office, actually set up training and shared lessons, which is back to Mr Gilnew's point about how that was taken forward. So that has been taken forward, and that training is being carried out, and then obviously a report going to the NICS board to summarise those changes as well.
And I guess just towards the conversation we just had in transformation from many of those aspects are out with the role of officials, and indeed the Planning Appeals Committee is an ALB of the Department of Justice as well, of course, which has a key role in terms of the process regarding those, and that's operationally independence. So it would require a more kind of a cross-cutting executive level for reform as part of this.
Would it be part of your initial project team for scoping out where you would see potential legal issues as a risk?
There are some fairly fundamental barriers that would prevent you raising the bar. Sorry to mix my metaphors there, but there is something, for example, the Aarhus Convention, which seeks to ensure that everybody should be able to use the law to protect the environment, and this caps the plaintiff's costs at £5,000 or £10,000 for a group, and that means that the cost as a discouragement to taking legal action really disappears. So unless the United Kingdom were to withdraw from that convention, then the judges can only apply the law as it stands, or the convention as it stands. So the bar will not be reduced in that area. There was talk of shortening the period during which applicants have to raise a judicial review, but the position of the legal establishment is very much that it's short enough as it is. The law, the deadlines that are set, it sees no justification for making them any shorter. So taking those two factors into account, I don't think the bar will be raised in the short term at least.
Well, thank you. And just on the cost and time overrun, so talking about the root cause analysis work, I just wanted to ask Jane in terms of the key areas of findings on it, people, policy and processes. What have you done to address those findings and recommendations?
Thank you, and I think not want to rehearse kind of the discussions previously. Obviously, the recommendations that were within my purview, we have put those in place and they're delivering. Sharon has walked you through those from a departmental perspective. In terms of the investment strategy, working with officials to have that ready for an incoming executive, as well as the programme for government and that reform agenda, and I as Secretary of the Executive and SRO for the programme for government, as well as being the next board, providing those cross-cutting structures, leading then, of course, for executive consideration of what will actually those reports look like and how we can deliver those over the subsequent number of years. But I guess this isn't some of these aspects, and we just talked about, where some of the major issues are occurring, and some of that is in that from that OBC to the FPC stages in terms of legal process is out with kind of the roles of officials. It requires a more radical agenda for reform, but to be able to provide that level of impartial data-led information which could fit into a reform agenda. I will be leading the reform and transformation aspect as well, and I guess this is creating the fundamental data to inform those areas. I know Brett gave some analysis, of course, of the root cause analysis, very significant body of work, and how we are factoring those into making sure that there's things we can actually meaningfully identify that are the barriers, but also that we can track and target them, that they're not just things that lay in a strategy or in a paper, but things that we give effect to, and crystallising down to the critical few elements that we do. So we'll be very content to come back, and I would be delighted to come back to this committee to give an update on that. Perhaps not the 3 years, perhaps not the 3 years, but as we move into getting the investment strategy launched, but the programme for government as well, and the report structure.
No, that's great. And again, the NICS board, have they requested a timetable or as far as like an action plan or the steps going forward from this root cause analysis?
Yeah, and I think that goes back to, and it sort of comes together. You had the mapping of the 105 actions, the root cause analysis, which I'd commend you to have a look at, and then, we've simplified it into these 12 actions, and at the last board, the NICS, the ISNI committee recommended, here's our progress on these, and here's, the next milestones that we'll need to achieve. And I've worked with the team to appoint an individual SRO for each of those 12 actions, which I was very keen on throughout. So we have a very clear action plan that you welcome.
What's the first deadline that we'll have? When do we?
There was one paper went out yesterday, and the People said, Scott was, sorry, not about that. But yeah, one paper went out yesterday that had a look at. So yeah, there's continuous progress of action.
It would be great, as you say, to have ongoing reporting and hearing how that's going on for us to discuss in the committee. It would be really, really useful.
Yeah, and I'd be very happy to come back. I mean, I guess speaking really frankly, set up the next board is reconstituted framework and establishing the execs. I would hope to have had a work plan in more detail now. Now, some of that happened because we obviously work on the direction of the executive, so the programme for government. My vision is that we have got some deliverables aspect, but we would have a scheduled work plan as a corporate board would have to say this is what we're delivering. Now we do have a focus at each of the sessions regarding we're doing a deep dive into the investment strategy. We're doing a deep dive into a draft programme for government and the fiscal elements, and then the people areas. So we are moving towards those areas. But the real part of me is we need to have focus in a smaller group of people who know the aspects, and they're making sure, and we're having that external scrutiny to hold us to account.
Thank you. Padraig, now I think Padraig has to go at 5:10, and he's a number of questions, so just if you can get them all. Thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you. Just checking you can hear me okay first.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Look, thanks. You'll be glad to know you've actually answered quite a number of my questions already. But just in terms of my first one, obviously the budget's cited quite often as a barrier to delivery, but as been touched on already, the root cause analysis doesn't show that as such a key reason. So I'm just keen, and I appreciate you've touched on this already, but as concisely as possible, would you be able to identify, maybe your top 3 targets and how you intend to measure them, and actually what are the barriers?
In terms of the enabling action plan, or in terms of budget, if I were
No, so not so budget is being cited consistently as one of the key barriers to delivery. So, but it's obviously the root cause analysis doesn't necessarily agree with that.
And I
That's the
think
I
actually
suppose the sole.
we would say that probably budget hasn't featured in the kind of the key barrier. I mean, obviously it's necessary, but it's not sufficient. In the policy included those legal aspects which we've just covered. In the process, it was the skills dimensions in terms of I guess procuring and estimating, but also the cost management, and then the people capability in terms of the delivery capacity. So I'm not sure. Obviously, budget needs to be in place, and some of the OBCs are done where budget isn't actually agreed. It has to come back for an FBC. So there's some of those aspects.
Yeah.
Perhaps I don't know, Sharon, you want to come in there?
Certainly from an infrastructure point of view, you will hear this many times if you talk to the industry, that multi-year budgets are essential in order to plan, because it's very, very difficult to squeeze infrastructure into a 12-month cycle. So we're really keen to see, in terms of infrastructure delivery, those multi-year budgets coming through, and that will give us sort of the pipeline and the funding arrangements in a more sustainable and stable way.
The other thing, maybe from a very high-level perspective, Patrick, is part of the exercise to create this version of the ISNI was to go out and ask departments what they would like to spend and then how much money, and there will be a significant gap between what's available to spend and what's needed, and there will be some areas where difficult decisions will have to be made, and just to try and fill out the 12 actions. Enabling Action 9 is to look at alternative financing over time for some of those. So there's some areas where you could bring in outside capital to do that. So there will be a mismatch between the supply of capital, what we'll have over the next 10 years, and what we'd ideally like to spend. Some hard decisions will have to be made. But that's what we've created Action 9. The only one I haven't mentioned so far is Environmental Budgets Action 12. But apart from that...
But actually, I think that's also a key point, is that we cannot measure things just with a financial envelope. It has to be measured with a carbon envelope, a carbon budget, because actually there are legal requirements, so it's not a zero-sum game. And then I would argue then a social element. In fact, that is why ISNI has been developed in terms of that people, planet, prosperity. What are the trades, the prioritisation lens that you need to look through? In the draft programme for government, it talks towards different borrowing powers, and indeed the sustainability plan, the fiscal plan, for the housing executive. We will not be able to build sufficient housing, so there needs to be different models of looking at that. So it's I guess, looking at what the options are to open different routes to fund and to prioritise.
No, thanks for that. And I suppose it's what I'm really keen at getting at here is the specific targets and the specific measures, because a lot of this is obviously, very broad and very overarching. So I would just like to take one of those specific areas. So skills is one that's has come up quite a lot today. So obviously, Economy Minister Conor Murphy prioritising in terms of Skill Up and those programmes. But specifically, what does that look like within the civil service? Does that mean that all staff are involved in consistent skilling? Does that mean specific staff who are working on these projects? What exactly does that look like? I would just like for it to be a wee bit more tangible, just so we can see exactly what sort of targets and measures are going to be put in place.
And that might be something, Mr. Log, we might come back with in terms of reflections. Maybe, Sharon, do you want to identify, because you have been working on those projects?
If again you ask me what success looks like, we have a procurement integrated plan, what we're going to deliver over the next, and I'm hoping that's going to be 5 years. So we've given an action, I think, by March 2025, that integrated plan. Now that all relies on ISNI being agreed. So in the absence of an executive agreeing ISNI, so there's a starting point, and we haven't reached that starting point yet. But what we have done, we are still delivering maintenance, and there's a huge amount of money in terms of the ISNI investment pot that we have to dedicate towards maintenance, which is known. So what we've asked all centres of procurement expertise and departments to do is to say, what's your capacity and capability to deliver your maintenance? What frameworks do you have in place? What contracts do you have in place? When are you going to market? Can we collaborate? Can we use frameworks that already exist? So to coexist with a procurement integrated plan, what we also need is a workforce plan. So we know what we're going to do. It's who are we going to engage with to do that, public and private sector. So what are the skills at each of those stages? Where do we need them? Where do we get them? That will help us inform how many SIB advisors we need, how many external bodies we need. I'm not sure on the timescale on that, but what each of these enable and action plan actions have is their own project initiation document to say how are we going to do it, by when, and who's going to do it. And Patrick has been very determined that each of these actions has an owner, so he can actually call that person to account. And I'm owning 7, and I'm very conscious of that. So I hopefully will not be found wanting in getting that integrated procurement plan together. It is a huge piece of work. Let's not underestimate the job of work we're trying to do, because this is trying to work across departments who are all very busy, who have all got their own sets of procedures and processes. And let's also recognise that 75% of the delivery is out with the NICS. So even if we have the best terms and conditions for the NICS, if it's not replicated across all the arm's length bodies, then we have that inequity. So again, a huge amount of work. But the closest milestone for me is March 2025. We should have an integrated procurement plan. Hopefully that will coexist with a workforce plan as well.
But just to... Sorry, shall I just give you my...
No, go ahead.
My vision, and Sharon owns Action 7, Scott owns Action 1 at the moment in terms of the people plan. So what I'd like to see in terms of the monitoring and governance, so we'll have a plan for X billion over the next 10 years. I'd like a short-term plan of what we intend to, the capital budget for the next 1-3 years. And then in terms of the workforce plan, I'd like to see, with 359 project managers, Sharon listed the statistics for the other associated professions. Can we deliver that there, deliver capital against that? That's basic workforce planning. Do we need more civil engineers? Do we need, and then we can say, well, we need to go and hire these people. So just, I'm very good at drawing vague pictures, but that's the picture that I would envisage, accompanying, and then the ISNI committee, and that can be reported up to the executive in terms of what we go. So, thanks. That's just helped Scott and I draft that next piece, but I've had that image in my mind.
Yeah, no, that's useful, and I think for us as well, what's really important is exactly what this looks like, and making sure that it is measurable, that it's accountable. So it's really reassuring to hear that you have those processes in place, and I think that's something very much welcome. I know you've already said that you'd be willing to come back to committee, and if possible, I would love to get a wee bit more detail on those plans, because I just think that it's important to get that better understanding of exactly what the targets are, so that they can be measured. I did have another couple of questions, but to be honest, I think they would be better answered if you were to come back, if that's okay. So I might even just run through. I mean, the key one for me is one of the things, I'm sure you get it as well all the time, is things move so much quickly in the private sector versus the public sector, and that's obviously a very broad kind of conversation. But what learning specifically, like in terms of what would be the 3 top learning points that you would think that can be adapted from private to public sector that aren't currently there? I would just be keen to really get into, rather than the overarching stuff, to really get into some of the detail on this. I appreciate it mightn't be an answer today, but it's just if that can be fed back into the next session when you're back in.
It feels like there may be maybe in a different format, but with discussing the root cause analysis and then how that's fed into enabling actions. Obviously, there's areas, the executive will have to agree the investment strategy for Northern Ireland and bring that forward, and the action plans will be carried on that. But I think that would be, I'm looking towards my colleagues, I think we'd be very welcome to come back and work through those areas. Has been a very significant amount of analysis has been done.
Yeah. No, listen, thanks very much. I appreciate your really detailed answers today. So I'm conscious that other people have questions to ask as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Cathal?
I couldn't resist, Chair.
Obviously.
Brad sat over there for most of the meeting, and then he broke out towards the end here with loads of data. And that's good information in terms of what the root cause analysis. So my question then is, moving forward, because if we take planning per se, people are allowed to object, they're entitled to object. The environmental laws are or have to be applied, and all the things that goes with it should be part of the process. And you said it was complex. Enabling actions, where do we go from here in terms of, I mean, should be across all the departments? Does that, now I'm going to throw this out here, but I shouldn't really say maybe, but it's to ensure that departments analyse what's there and what caused it and do their bit in terms of moving the project on, staying within the parameters that's been identified. Because that's the first time we heard so much detail in. We've all been there in individual planning applications, and we've had a number of discussions recently, and I outlined the planning issue. It's just one of a number of things, but it's part of the whole process and what we're trying to do. Reports, so enabling action where we're
I'll let Brett come in and then afterwards. But I guess on some process, just the volume of analysis, data-led information analysis that has been performed by SIB to identify, because you get anecdotal things of saying, and there's kind of that get built into kind of public perception. So how that's data informed, those have been then fed in to the enabling actions through the work that Patrick has led, as well as all the recommendations and the feedback, that mapping to say what are the areas that we need to address going forward. You'll see in the draft programme for government a number of the enabling actions are called out. The planning improvement system is called out, the water infrastructure is called out, even within the draft programme for government, even though that's generally not something that is covered, because those are so fundamental to delivering a programme for government. And then the investment strategy includes those aspects. The enabling actions obviously have been developed by a subgroup, a subcommittee of the next board. They have been brought to the next board for approval of those enabling actions that they were supporting, those, and then those will be factored into various different reports. So.
But this is getting back to the point about silos, and you know what we've set these up to be is cross-cutting actions across the departments. What I've been really pleased with is, you know, and I didn't ask the Perm Sec of Department of Health to be on the subcommittee. I asked his person who's in charge of capital, and I said, okay, your workforce plan here, we won't need to talk to, you know, the underlying health trusts. We need to be able to speak to the Education Authority to start to work on their workforce planning, because there's no point us getting money up here to build schools and hospitals down there if you don't have the people in place. And they facilitated those discussions. So that's what I'm really encouraged, is that we are setting these as cross-cutting actions and strategic, and we're going down and getting the discussions at the individual departmental level, because people know that it's the right strategy to pursue.
Leading to outcomes, obviously, which is the PFD. You know what I mean?
I love process, I like outcomes more.
You know, no, I'm just, it's just...
All these is support of the ministers and their executive programme for government and their investment strategy. Brett, do you want to talk maybe just more of the analysis that...
Yeah, I mean, we've done work to look at what could be classified as either mitigations, short-term fixes that might help address some of the symptoms that we've seen, and also look at what could actually remedy them in the long term. And we're not alone in this, because the problems that we face here in Northern Ireland are exactly the same as those that are being faced elsewhere within the United Kingdom and in the Republic of Ireland. So in terms of what could be done to fundamentally address the issues that we've been discussing, it will require legislative change. There's no doubt about it. And the most important element of that will be simplification, to have a single, consistent regulatory environment. Anyone working in Northern Ireland will know the particular difficulties that are caused by the lack of local development plans. Those have not been completed, and the courts have regularly identified the absence of such plans as complicating all the issues and making it much more difficult for planning officers to make their decisions. So that's the first thing. Second thing, there might be short-term actions that could be taken that would, for example, stop the clock once a judicial review is taken. One of the consequences of a judicial review, whether it's successful or unsuccessful, is that many permits expire during the course of the judicial review process. And it's been suggested in the Republic of Ireland and elsewhere that either you allow the clock to be stopped at the point when the judicial review starts so that those permits do not expire, or you allow the courts to say, well, this is a technical error. It's a small error that could easily be corrected, so we will allow that to happen. So an example of that is only relatively recently. In June, the Court of Appeal ruled that a project to establish a gas storage facility under Larne Lock, the planning application for that, the planning permission for that was quashed because the DERA minister had not referred it to his executive colleagues as a cross-cutting issue. Now, that can be remedied in a week. Jane could arrange for it to be presented, or DERA minister could present it to his executive colleagues, and it could be remedied very, very quickly if the system allowed it to, but the system doesn't. What happens is the planning permission is quashed and you go back to the start line and you start again, or very close to the start line. So that's another change that could be made. Within the planning system, we could enable the planning authorities to prioritise strategically important projects so they get dealt with first. That's another opportunity. Or we could seek to influence the government in London to pursue the sorts of changes it is already envisioning for net zero related projects, such as putting all the network cables that are required to support sustainable generation of electricity through more quickly than is currently the case, and similarly with housing. They, in order to achieve their housing targets, they are, for example, considering having planning passports, which is a form of enabling rapid permitted developments that are directed towards increasing the number of houses being built. So there are a range of potential actions that could be taken. Some of them have limited effect, others would fundamentally change the whole system. But they do require a lot of effort, all of them, in order to deliver the outcomes that we're all looking for.
I want to stamp on councillors' toes just for the minute. I don't want to stamp on councillors' toes either, but it takes partnership and obviously a lot of conversation.
But I guess it's data analysis, which a range of options, which is for political, accountable people to understand with an evidence base to provide.
Thanks, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Members, is there any other questions? I just have one more. Just one more. we're nearly there. We are nearly there. I'm just looking here at the draft investment strategy. So it doesn't cover all major capital projects. Is that right? Does it cover the maternity hospital in the Royal?
Right. The investment strategy is a strategy, not an investment plan. The two are separate. So the investment strategy sets out the objectives, it identifies the sources and broad deployment of funding, and a very important element is the enabling actions, which are so key to delivering the strategy. What it doesn't do is list projects. That is a matter for ministers to decide which projects they are prepared to prioritise, which they will allocate funding to, and is a separate exercise.
Okay, no, thank you. Just going back, obviously, to the maternity hospital, so we know about the significant cost increase and the delays that's happened with that major project. At this stage, do you believe it's deliverable? And what type of conversations have been happening with the Department of Health to try and get this moving?
Obviously, we don't have the representation from Department of Health, which would be for them to discuss. And they are represented on the investment strategy, but I think in respect of their position, they'd be probably better informed to come back, or we can ask them to provide advice into this committee if that's
that would be fantastic. Thank you very much. And so no further questions then? No. Look, thank you so much. You've been very patient, you've been very open and very transparent, and I think it's been a good session and with a good amount of information that we can hopefully drive forward for major capital projects. And I think we've all touched on it, that these aren't just projects here in Northern Ireland, this is people's lives and this is about making Northern Ireland better. So I do really appreciate the way you've came to the committee today, and I hope you've enjoyed yourselves as much as you can in a PAC committee.
Say yes. Enjoy it.
Straight back. Straight back.
Well, Sharon got to talk about it, enabling Action 7, so you're happy.
You're happy. You're happy. Look, thank you so much for everything.
We are very grateful, and we have huge respect for what the committee's purpose, and it's really important for us to hear the chance. There's things, of course, which we had anticipated, but there's many learnings we'll take from this and feedback in. I think we took some actions there to come back regarding the root cause analysis and the enabling actions to push you further in whatever format that works best for you, and also the action in terms of maternity hospital. But thank you so much. Thank you to colleagues as well for.
Thank you. Thank you.
And just before you go, CNAG, do you have any comments to make? You're under pressure. TOA, any comments? Thank you so much. Thank you. Cheers.
Thank you.
I'm sweating.
It's very warm in here. You're not even down that side.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I don't know whether you can open. Is there air in here? No.
You're welcome to come to Armagh anytime. We're still celebrating.
My niece just married in Armagh.
We're still celebrating. We're still celebrating. You're more than welcome. Yeah, still celebrating.
As you should. As you should.
Sweating.
You know, it's not
That was all the training we were protesting about. You were all good. You can tell you didn't do it.
Was some major piece of work.
Members, are we happy to go into closed now?
Yes, I have it. Don't give us any more. We don't need any. Tend to.
Committee Room 30. Sound. Committee Room 30. Sound.